Hello friends. This is Phoenix. What if? How are you all? So in this video, we will see what if Naruto awakened with the Blessed Eye and the Mokuton power. But before we start, if you want more amazing stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Also, if possible, share this video with your friends. Now without wasting any more time, let's begin the story. Konoha was known as a beautiful and powerful place. Its villagers bustled around for their morning business. Some were talking to their friends and neighbors. Some were on their way to work. Some were shopping, and there was also the few dozen Konoha ninjas scattered around, looking at the market stalls. Birds tweeted happily. The talking of people filled the previously quiet streets, and many were staring up at the Hokage monument, which had been doodled and drawn on with paint. The faces of the previous and current Hokages looked childish. Many were gasping in outrage at such an act. Naru Uzumaki, quote, a young blonde 12-year-old girl by the name of Naru Uzumaki was running from the Junin of Konoha, again. Blonde pigtails flying out behind her, sapphire blue eyes sparkling with a bright light of mischief that sent many running in the other direction, and a large smile curving her lips upwards, causing the 3 black whisker marks adorning each cheek to curve as well, meant that she was, or had, caused trouble. At the moment, she had just caused big trouble, and was playing a game that she liked to call Escape from the Ninjas. You can't catch me, NYA, Naru giggled mischievously, and made a sharp turn down an alley. Whoa! She quickly did a double back to avoid the shinobi who had dropped from above. Not today. She somehow managed to outsmart him and disappeared from his view. It wasn't as if she were hard to spot, not with her bright hair, and the eyesore of a bright orange jumpsuit she wore. She was just near enough impossible to catch. One had to think like her if they ever hoped to catch her, and since none thought like her, it made for rather embarrassing stories to tell to friends at the local pub. The pursuing shinobi and kunoichi cursed. This happened every single week. Naru would cause trouble, and any ninja in the vicinity would have to chase after the little prankster, and embarrassingly, neither the Chunin, Junin or Anbu could ever possibly catch the girl. She was far too sneaky. What was more embarrassing was that the only one to ever manage to catch the dead last of the academy was the low-ranked Chunin, Iruka Amino, who happened to be the girl's academy sensei. Of course, Hiruzen Sarutobi, 3rd Hokage, could easily catch her, but he was currently in his office nursing a headache caused by Naru's mischief. Why couldn't the girl be in class like any other normal child who wanted to be a ninja? Oh yes, because Naru was certainly not a normal child. Not with the unholy mischief she got up to daily. Kuso. A Junin cursed, coming to a stop on top of a local apartment building, and he scanned the area, hoping to catch sight of golden blonde hair, or that horrible orange jumpsuit, but no such luck. Someone landed next to him, and Anbu crouched down, eyes raking over some of the market below. She knows the place well, a female commented, sounding coolly amused with the whole situation. You don't have to sound like you're enjoying this, dragon, the Junin snapped in irritation. A low, feminine laugh escaped from beneath the dragon-painted mask. Why not? She's just a child having fun, she said, shifting until she was now seated with her legs dangling off the edge of the building, and I, for one, think it is highly amusing that not one of our best can catch her. She'll be a brilliant ninja, don't you think? The Junin snorted. That girl is hardly ever in class, which is where we prepare to become ninja, dragon. She cannot possibly be learning anything while she is running rampant around the village. You don't believe that we become ninja because of the academy, do you? Dragon questioned, tilting her head to the side. Sure, we learn all the basic skills needed, and all of the written things, but we learn how to be real ninja out there. She nodded her head in the direction of the Konoha gates. That girl can easily escape Chunin, Junin, and Anbu. I think she has great potential. The Junin stared at the female Anbu. You're fond of her, he said, raising an eyebrow. Of all the academy students to be fond of. Is there something wrong with her? Dragon's tone had dropped ice cold. You are surely not holding a grudge against her for that, are you? The Junin sighed. Hi, he answered truthfully. To answer your question, though I do not think you deserve it, Dragon began, making the man flinch. I am not fond of her. I am simply one of the few who do not blame her for something that is not her fault. The Junin sighed, but caught sight of a flash of orange. I have to go, he said, and jumped off the building roof. Dragon sighed. I am also watching her as a favor to old friends, she said quietly to herself, before she straightened up, formed a hand sign, and disappeared in a swirl of leaves. Naru Uzumaki. Stop right there. A Chunin yelled out from behind Naru, who glanced behind her and saw two of them. As if you telling me to stop will actually do anything, she scoffed, and made a sharp turn down a street that had light-colored fences running down it. She eyed them for a moment, before she smirked and looked behind her. They would so fall for it. The two Chunins came running down the street, but when they saw no sign of the mischievous academy student, they traded annoyed looks and jumped away. A moment later, a part of the fence shimmered and a sheet matching the fence dropped to the floor, revealing a giggling Naru. They so fell for it, she said in amusement. I so got away this time. She was feeling incredibly proud of herself for outrunning all of the best ninja. Maybe she should treat herself to ramen? Oh, really, Naru? A dark voice questioned from behind her, and as it reached her eyes, it seemed to bring an angry darkness with it. Naru froze. Iruka-sensei, she stammered and slowly turned around, already feeling defeat. No matter how many Chunin, Junin and Anbu she outran, she had never been able to outrun her academy teacher, ever. The normally kind-faced and soft-spoken academy teacher was looming in front of her, his overshadowed eyes glaring angrily at her. The scar running across his nose made his looks more scary. He pulled something out from behind his back and she winced. Defeat was really unfair. XXXXXXXXXXX. It was 5 minutes later that found Naru sat on the floor at the front of her class. Ropes tightly bound around her upper body so her arms were kept at her side. She had her legs crossed and an almost stubborn, rebellious look on her face. Iruka-sensei nursed the headache forming as he stared down at his favorite pupil, the one who had caused so much trouble just this morning. Naru, why did you? He asked quietly, trying to make himself heard to his student over the rest of his loud students, who were laughing at the girl, while trying not to embarrass the girl by shouting it out. Naru shot her classmates a vicious and furious look, which made them quieten down, and she turned her attention to the wall. Because it was fun, she said casually. A vein throbbed on Iruka's face. You think disfiguring the Hokage monument is fun? He said in a deadly quiet voice, and Naru turned to him, sensing the oncoming scolding. How is that funny, Naru? Those are the faces of our Hokages. Very well respected. And you've done that, quote. It's paint. It will come off, Naru snapped back, struggling with her bonds a bit. And it is not disfiguring, it is art. Iruka's eyebrow twitched at the defensive tone in her voice. She was defending those silly doodles. That is not art, Naru, and it doesn't matter if it is paint, Iruka said. What matters is that you've done it. He was very disappointed in her, and she knew it, because she frowned. I'll become Hokage one day, and I'll let any pranks happen. Loud, mocking laughter came from the whole class. You become Hokage? Get real, Naru, you're the dead last. You can't even graduate. Those words hit Naru, and she struggled more against the ropes, wanting nothing more than to beat everyone up. Iruka sighed. For Naru's trouble, we'll be practicing the Henge no Jutsu, he said calmly. As expected, protests arose from the whole class. Nani, we didn't do anything, quote. Why are you punishing us? Way to go, Naru Baka. Naru rolled her eyes. You'll be first, Naru, Iruka said, going to untie his student, but he got a shock when Naru stood up, and the ropes pooled at her feet. What the? How did you do that? He was sure he had tied an unreachable and untieable knot, at least very untieable to her. Naru grinned, shrugged, and walked over to her gathered classmates. When it came to her turn, Iruka stood behind his desk, staring severely at her, and as she formed the correct hand seal, a sudden thought struck her. It couldn't hurt, could it? Henge number Jutsu, quote. Naru was obscured in a cloud of smoke, and for a moment, Iruka felt a thrill of pride, but it vanished as did the smoke. Standing in her place was now a gorgeous young woman, same golden pigtails, same sapphire eyes, same whisker marks, and same tanned skin, but this woman, she was completely naked with a huge bust. Usually, she would use this form, with clothes on of course, to buy things from the store, but there was no harm in using it for a little mischief, was there? Iruka's eyes widened in shock, and blood spurted from his nose sending him flying backwards. Naru Uzuamki. So worth it. It was later that day that found Naru furiously scrubbing at the Hokage faces, suspended by a piece of wood on rope, while Iruka sat atop of the third Hokage's head, watching his student in silence. Iruka checked his watch. 3:45 p.m. "Naru, if you don't hurry up, you won't be able to get home quickly," he said. The girl was purposely cleaning the faces slowly, he could tell. "What's the point, anyway? There's no one waiting for me at home," she said bitterly, and scrubbed at the same part of the face she had been scrubbing for the past 10 minutes, and, although Iruka admired her harsh way of cleaning, that spot was now shining, and she was just wasting time. Iruka's eyes softened sadly, and he gazed at his student with empathy. He knew what it was like to have no one to go home to, but he didn't know what it was like to have Naru's life, with no parents from birth, and with no friends. "How about, if you hurry up here, I'll take you out for ramen?" That got the desired result. Naru's eyes brightened and she quickly began to clean furiously, this time, away from the spot she'd been at for 10 minutes. Turns out, Naru was a pretty fast cleaner when motivated, thought Iruka, as they walked away from the Hokage monument 20 minutes later. The girl would probably fight a whole war if ramen was offered. The thought of Naru, his little student, his little sister, in a war, twisted Iruka's stomach into an untiable knot. She was far too young, far too innocent, he thought, as he watched the small prankster bounce ahead, a spring in her step at the thought of ramen. It was a good thing that there was no upcoming wars, no potential war to damage that innocence. "Iruka-sensei, hurry up," Naru called from in front of him. She was stood just outside of the ramen stand. Her youthful face lit up happily like a beacon, and he quickened his step to get to her side. About time. She pulled her sensei into the ramen stand. The ramen stand owner, Chuki, greeted his most favorite customer with a large and warm smile that made the wrinkles on his face even more visible. His warm brown eyes flickered up to the empty space on Naru's forehead, and over to Iruka, who sighed quietly and shook his head. The old man sighed. "Hey Naru-chan, is sensei paying for your appetite tonight?" It was well known that Iruka would regularly come here with Naru, and always leave with an empty wallet. Naru beamed and nodded as she dropped onto the stool at the counter, Iruka sitting down next to her in a more refined way. "I'll have 2 bowls of chicken ramen to start off with," she demanded, and Tucci shot a look at Iruka, who'd winced at the "to start off with" part, before he grinned and nodded. "You, sensei?" Tucci asked kindly. "A bowl of miso ramen, please," Iruka said softly. Tucci nodded and got to work on cooking for his favorite customer and her sensei. While they waited, Iruka turned to Naru, who was now swinging her legs like a small child, causing him to chuckle. "Iruka-sensei." Naru sounded so serious, and so unlike herself, that he immediately felt concern. "Is there something wrong, Naru-chan?" Iruka said, worry coloring his tone. Naru bit her lip. "What's it like to wear that?" she said, gesturing to Iruka's forehead, her tone indication that she meant something more. This was a side of Naru that was rarely seen, but Iruka had been lucky enough to experience it. His student wasn't as dumb and as oblivious as she made out to be. When she did things and said things or asked things, there was usually another deeper meaning behind it. "Well," Iruka said, picking up on Naru's question, and he knew what it really meant. What was it like to be a Konoha ninja? "It's a great honor. I can't really explain it, Naru-chan. When you put on the high tate, it's a very strange feeling, like you've achieved something very great." Quote. Naru looked extremely thoughtful as she nodded and looked away, her eyes going distant, which meant that she was lost in thought. It was not the first time that Iruka wished he could hear what was going on in her head. "Oh, look, the ramen's here," he said, and successfully got his student's attention as she grinned and her eyes lit up. It was the start of another night of emptying Iruka's wallet. 20 bowls to 2 in Naru's favor later, the two of them began the trek home. "I'll see you tomorrow, Iruka-sensei," she said with a soft sigh. "Sakura Haruno." Naru watched as the pink-haired girl happily bounced down the steps in the classroom, shooting Sasuke Uchiha a look, her eyes lashes batting in what she probably thought was a sweet way, but it just made her look very strange and desperate. She sighed and lounged back in the seat, stretching her legs out onto the desk. "You shouldn't look so relaxed, Dobi," Kiba Inuzuka said from in front of her, his puppy, Akamaru, resting comfortably on his head. "You'll fail anyway." She allowed the smile to remain on her face. "Still touchy about me dyeing your clothes pink?" she questioned. "I don't know why, the dye washed out after 2 weeks." Although, Kiba had no choice but to wear pink clothes for 2 weeks, it was nice not to be laughed at and humiliated for once. Kiba scowled and stormed away. It was then she allowed her smile to fall a bit. She and Kiba, along with Shikamaru Nara and Choji Amikichi, had once been good friends, but as they grew older, and she revealed her true, mischievous colors which did not let her stay in class for long, while they were willing to stay and work, they'd slowly drifted apart. She sighed. Sakura came running back in, her emerald green eyes glowing, and a high tape was tied around her big forehead. "I did it," she squealed happily, poking her tongue out at her ex-best friend, Ino Yamanaka, before she turned to her crush. "Sasuke-kun, I did it, see?" Sasuke pointedly ignored her and continued to glare darkly at the wall as if it had just called him a bad name. Naru should know, she'd received plenty of those looks from him. Sasuke Uchiha. The Uchiha suddenly stood up, attracting all attention, and he walked down the stairs and out of the classroom, his hands still in his pocket. What a drama queen, thought Naru boredly, turning her attention to the ceiling. Oh look, there was a crack. One by one, the class were called. Some passed, while others didn't. Eventually, only one person was left. Naru Uzumaki. Whispers began. Naru placed her feet on the floor, stood up and walked down the steps, whispers following her as she went. "She won't pass, she never does. I don't know why she still tries, it's obvious what's going to happen." The blonde resisted the urge to turn around and yell at them all, but she suppressed the feeling and left the classroom, only to walk into another one at the end of the hall. Iruka-sensei and Mizuki-sensei were seated at a desk inside an empty room. The former's face was completely serious, while the latter's was carefree and relaxed. "Naru," Iruka said warmly, sending the girl a smile as she came and stood 2 feet in front of the desk. "Third time's a charm." Naru grinned brightly, although her insides were jumbled and twisted like tiny little knots. "Hi," she said happily. "Right, can you please perform the Bunshin no Jutsu? Possibly her worst jutsu ever." Naru took a deep breath and formed the correct hand seals. As she did so, no one saw Mizuki discreetly place his hands under the desk and form hand seals, nor did they see the evil glint in his eyes. "Bunshin number jutsu," she called out, and a poof of smoke erupted next to her. She turned towards it, her heart swelling with hope, but it popped like a balloon when she saw her clone. It was lying on the floor, its skin so white it looked like snow. All in all, it appeared half dead. "Naru," Iruka said with a sad sigh, and she turned towards him, her gaze pleading, but he shook his head. "Not this time, Naru, Gomen." Naru brushed it off and smiled widely, despite her heart thudding and her stomach coiling. "It's fine, I'll try again next time," she said, before she quickly exited the room. She would not cry. Iruka watched his favorite student leave, and he wanted to go and comfort her, but he would not be a good sensei to show favoritism. "Don't worry, Iruka, she'll do better next time," Mizuki said with a reassuring smile, and Iruka smiled and nodded at him, before standing up and walking out of the room. His reassuring smile turned cold and evil. "There won't be a next time. Sorry, Iruka." Quote. It wasn't so depressing, or sad, thought Naru as she sat on the swing, watching as her old academy classmates were congratulated by their parents. She quickly blinked away the tears that were caused by 2 things. Sadness at not passing for the 3rd time, and sadness because she had no parents or family. Normally, the having no family bit didn't bother her anymore since she'd learned to get over it, but sometimes, when things like this happened, she felt a pang of loss for a family she never knew. A slight noise to her left caught her attention and she saw Mizuki standing there, a seemingly soft smile on his face, but if she had looked harder, glanced at his eyes, she wouldn't have trusted him at all. "Sorry about you not passing, Naru-chan," he said, his voice lingering a bit, indicating that he had more to say. Naru shook her head. "It's fine, I'll pass next time," she said with a wide, fake smile. "Well, there is one way you can pass now, Naru-chan," Mizuki said offhandedly, looking to his side in an apparent casual way. Interest and curiosity piqued. She looked up at him with wide and hopeful eyes. "Really?" "Hi, but it's sort of a secret test, one that the academy has for situations like this," Mizuki said smoothly. "If you pass this, you'll surely be on a genin team tomorrow morning." "Really? You're not lying." Naru was so happy and excited that she missed the evil in Mizuki's smile. "What do I have to do?" Mizuki's eyes were positively evil. Well. XXXXXXXXXXX. Later that night, Naru waited until Old Man Hokage was about to leave the office, which was when she burst in, surprising the old man. Naru. What in the world? Sarutobi was cut off by Naru smiling apologetically and placing her hands together in a very familiar seal. Oiroke number jutsu. In a poof of smoke, 12-year-old Naru was gone, and replaced by a young woman holding remarkably similar features to Naru, including the 3 whisker marks on each cheek. It took Sarutobi only a second to realize that she was naked, and another second for him to fall unconscious, blood trickling from his nose. Pervert, she muttered as she changed back into her 12-year-old self, and quickly jumped over the old man with a bounce and a bright smile. Now, if Mizuki-sensei's directions were correct, the scroll was there, hidden behind a thick wooden door that was stuffed into the corner of the office, seemingly not important, and not where anyone would think to look for something so important. Quietly, she pulled the door open, hoping no alarm went off, and to her luck, it didn't. This test was becoming a bit easier than she expected. Now all she had to do was get the scroll and take it to Mizuki-sensei. Walking into the small room, she hesitated in taking the scroll, which was stood on a statue base, her fingers brushing against it. A bad feeling was in her stomach, and something in her head was shouting at her, telling her something was wrong, but she ignored it all and picked up the scroll. Now, how to get it out of the Hokage building without being seen? Minutes later found Naru running through the woods, towards the place Mizuki-sensei had told her about. It didn't take her long to find it, and upon not seeing the academy sensei there, she decided that it couldn't hurt to sit down and have a little peek at the scroll now, could it? Opening the scroll and laying it down flat across the forest floor, she was awarded with the sight of the names of jutsus in kanji, and the description of them jotted underneath. She looked through, trying to find one that caught her attention the most, and she found one. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. That perked her interest quickly and she got to reading it, her eyes lighting up as she did. Time must have passed far too quickly because the next thing she knew, Iruka-sensei had arrived in the clearing, his face set in a mask of fury. Iruka-sensei, she said unsurely, not releasing her hold on the giant scroll, which was now rolled up securely. Iruka glared at her angrily. Naru, he snapped, what in the world were you thinking? What do you mean? Naru said in confusion, furrowing her brows as she stood up. I was waiting for Mizuki-sensei. Mizuki. Iruka repeated his friend's name in bewilderment. Why in Kami's name would you be waiting in the forest with the scroll, for Mizuki? Because he told me to, Naru said, a sense of dread dawning on her, and the pit in her stomach grew. Iruka frowned and looked at his student's face. He searched it for any traces of mischief. There was no unholy light in her eyes that suggested she were pulling a prank or a trick, which could only mean one thing. Mizuki told you to take the scroll, he said faintly, feeling his heart pang from the betrayal of his friend. Hi. Naru trailed off, seeing the anger in Iruka-sensei's normally gentle eyes, but this time, it was not directed at her. Mizuki said that it was another exam. That if I took the scroll and gave it to him, I would become a genin. Why didn't you tell me about this test? Because there is no test, Naru-chan, Iruka said tiredly, rubbing his forehead to prevent the growing headache. Of all the things to be able to trick Naru with. But it would have been easy to trick her with this. Tempt her dream of becoming a genin. Nothing other than that could have tricked her. She didn't fall for silly excuses. But Mizuki. Naru's eyes widened as she realized what had happened. He tricked me. This isn't a real test. Why would he do that? That doesn't matter, Naru-chan, Iruka said, shaking his head to rid himself of the thousands of thoughts running through his mind. Listen to me. You have to get back to Hokage-sama, and tell him what you've just told me, and that Mizuki is no longer to be trusted. Do you understand? Biting her lip, Naru nodded, a spark of fear entering her eyes. Sensei. She began, pure apology in her voice. Iruka cut her off with a kind smile. I know, now go. Naru nodded and ran into the forest. The academy teacher looked around for any sign of his former friend, when his eyes were drawn to where Naru had just exited from. She was coming back, her eyes determined. Naru, I told you too late. Too late, a dark voice cackled from above, and Mizuki dropped from the canopy above. His walk towards them was confident and self-assured. Mizuki. Iruka spat, pushing Naru behind him, and she willingly went, her blue eyes wide. You dare betray Konoha? He was furious beyond belief. Furious that his old friend, a fellow ninja, could do something like this. Mizuki chuckled loudly, the sound cold, dark and bone-chilling. Hand over the scroll, girl, and I won't kill you, he said coolly, eyes fixed on the girl that hid behind Iruka. Iruka hid the triumphant smile that was threatening to cross his lips. The trick had worked. If Mizuki was a true academy teacher, then he would know his students by now, and he would know that this girl he was hiding behind him was not Naru. It was a clone. The real Naru would not have allowed him to push her behind him, no, she would have protested loudly and fought to stay in front so she could yell at Mizuki. He hoped the real Naru was close to the village by now. She has nothing to do with this, Mizuki, Iruka said, making an act of shifting so that he was fully covering the Naru clone. Why would you betray Konoha? Mizuki's face twisted into an unnaturally dark look. Konoha, be loyal to the Hokage. Be loyal to each other, he spat. I hate the word loyal, it's all this village is about. It makes a person weak. Iruka had to admit to himself that he was in shock at what had become of his former good friend. Only when you fight for yourself can you become strong, to defeat all those that stand in your way, like my master. Mizuki said, an expression similar to pure devotion on his face. You're wrong, Iruka snapped angrily. Loyalty is what has made this village strong. Loyalty. Mizuki let out a loud, barking laugh. Once he calmed down, he chuckled a bit. Loyalty is not something every generation is blessed with, is it? Don't tell me you've already forgotten Itachi Uchiha. Where was his loyalty that night? Where was it as he slaughtered his family? Quote, do not judge a whole village by one person's actions, Iruka said. None of this matters. What matters is that you are not getting your hands on that scroll, Mizuki. He then grabbed Naru and shot off into the trees with her. Mizuki smirked and gave chase. Naru looked around in a panic, her eyes darting around at the trees as she ran through them. What could she do? She so wanted to go back there and help Iruka-sensei, but she was just an academy student, one that had failed the genin test 3 times. The scroll on her back suddenly felt 10 times heavier as she realized that this was her fault. She had been so easily tricked, and that she really had no idea what she was doing. She paused for a moment, in the gap between 4 trees that seemed to create a box-like shape, and she looked around. She knew these woods like the back of her hand since she had spent most of her childhood hiding out here from villagers, but there was also a big chance that Mizuki also knew them. He had lived here his whole entire life, after all. Brushing her golden bangs out of her eyes, those sapphire orbs looked around again, her mind whirling with the possibilities. She was a prankster, something the whole village knew, but it helped. Traps and triggers were a specialty of hers. Pranks required as such, and she could easily manage to rig something up in the forest, but the only thing was if Mizuki would fall for it, and what if Iruka-sensei was caught in it? All this thinking was making her head hurt, and something in her stomach was churning harshly, as if wanting to be released, or noticed, it was hard to say. A strange noise, a mixture of rustling and breaking, like the sound of a tree growing quickly, caught her attention and she whirled around, expecting to see someone or something, but she only saw trees. Lots of trees that looked young and full of leaves. Actually, it was quite difficult to see through them. Naru furrowed her eyebrows. She had just come that way, and she was pretty sure that there was not that many trees before. She shook her head. Tonight's events were playing with her head. Right. Iruka-sensei said that she needed to get to the old man Hokage, but truthfully, she had never really been one for following rules, nor did she like to. Even the thought of doing as she was told was disturbing. Biting her lip, she removed the scroll from her back and tried to remember what she had learned in the academy. Placing the scroll down, she knew exactly what would work in this situation, a jutsu that had recently become her favorite. Dog, boar, ram. Henge number jutsu. In a poof of smoke, the large scroll became a small, normal-shaped, but worn, log that fit in well with the trees around it, looking like it had simply been there for years. A mischievous glint lit her eyes. Mizuki dare threaten Iruka-sensei? He was going to regret it. Mizuki let out a mad laugh as he finally caught up with Naru. He had taken Iruka out 3 minutes ago. The man was probably lying there, dying from blood loss. No use running anymore, brat. With a large leap, he managed to knock the young girl off course, and she fell from the tree branch with a loud yell. He dropped from the canopy to see the blonde attempting to straighten herself up, while glaring at him angrily. Something in that glare seemed so familiar. It didn't quite fit her eyes. "I was thinking about letting your death be a quick and painless one," he said pleasantly, "but you just had to run off and refuse to give me the scroll, didn't you? It was a stupid move, brat, but rather expected from a stupid child." Naru's face flashed with anger. "I'm not stupid," she yelled, before her face changed into a triumphant smile that had some mischief laced with it. "Maybe you're the stupid one?" Mizuki's face convulsed angrily. "Excuse me." A smile covered the young girl's face. In a poof of smoke, Iruka stood there, a wide, clear smirk on his face. "You tricked me," Mizuki said with realization, a dark scowl covering his face. "It won't do you any good, Iruka. I'll find that girl eventually." He took slow, deliberate steps towards his old friend. "I'll find her. After I kill you, of course." Iruka held his head high. "Do you really think that I'm just an academy teacher, Mizuki?" He was slightly insulted that people thought him only a weak academy sensei. He could easily go for the Jonin test, but his calling lay with teaching the younger generation and he was quite happy with that. "Oh, I know about your strengths, Iruka," Mizuki said calmly, coming to a stop just some feet away from his fellow sensei. "I also know one of your weaknesses." Iruka raised an eyebrow. Mizuki simply cackled and rushed him. Naru came to a stop just behind a large, thick tree that easily covered her. She heard the sounds of clashing weapons and peered out from behind the tree. "Sensei," she whispered, feeling her heart constrict with fear as she watched Mizuki Teme hit Iruka-sensei again. She wanted to help. She needed to help. But she couldn't. She was just a genin, and Mizuki was proving to be quite talented, despite being a jerk. "I know you're close, Naru," Mizuki said loudly, his eyes raking the trees around him as Iruka fell to the ground, the injury from the shurikens too much, a trickle of blood falling from his mouth. "Do you want to know a little secret? One that the whole village knows about? Except you, of course?" Naru pulled back and leaned against the tree, but her curiosity was piqued and she turned her head slightly to listen. "Mizuki. Don't," Iruka shouted, sounding desperate. "Naru-chan, if you're close, don't listen to him, he's full of lies." Naru would always believe Iruka-sensei over anyone, but maybe there was a secret that everyone knew. One which would explain why everyone acted like she was dirt on the ground. She kept silent. "Do you want to know why everyone hates you, Naru?" Mizuki's voice taunted cruelly. Naru did want to know, so badly, but her stomach felt tight and in knots. 12 years ago, a demon, a monster, came to the village, the Kyuubi no Kitsune, Mizuki said, his voice not betraying the disgust he obviously felt at it. "It destroyed everything in its path, and killed so many of the Konoha ninjas, until the 4th Hokage rose up to defeat it, but demons cannot be killed, instead, he sealed it." Naru's eyes were wide and she felt her knotted stomach become jumbled. What did this have to do with her? "You, Naru Uzumaki, are the Kyuubi no Kitsune." Mizuki spat. "You're a stupid fox brat." It felt like a huge boulder had been dropped into her stomach, and her throat was so clogged up that she doubted that she could say anything if she tried to speak. It couldn't be true. She wasn't the Kyuubi. She was just a little 12-year-old girl. Not a monster, but everyone did hate her. Anger seeped through her. Why had everyone kept this a secret? Did the old man Hokage fake being nice to her? Still, something burned in the pit of her stomach, coiling like a ball of fire, feeling so hot that she was surprised she didn't feel something burn through her skin. She rested a hand against the shirt that covered her stomach, and she was surprised to feel it hot to the touch, even through the material. The burning seemed to feed her anger, and the angrier she got, the more the burning increased. "Don't listen to him," Iruka yelled in a panic. "Don't you ever wonder why Iruka treated you so differently when you were younger? You killed his parents." The whole world seemed to be on fire now. It was too hot. Naru tried to register the words, but she couldn't. Did she really kill Iruka-sensei's parents? Is that why he used to hate her so much? No. That can't be true. Iruka-sensei said she was very special to him. He hadn't been lying, had he? "Shut your mouth, Mizuki," Iruka snapped angrily, breathing heavily to calm his anger. "It's not true, Naru-chan. You didn't kill my parents." Naru felt herself calming slightly. Iruka-sensei wouldn't lie about something like this. But then she felt herself tense up again. He hadn't denied what Mizuki Teme had said. The Kyuubi killed Iruka's parents, fox brat, you killed them. That was it. With a rustle, Naru ran away. Mizuki's eyes snapped in that direction and with a large smirk, he ran after her. Iruka pushed himself up and ran after them. Naru weaved in and out of the trees, trying desperately to get away from Mizuki, from Iruka-sensei, from the truth. She could almost feel Mizuki's footsteps against the trees behind her, the echo of the noise caused by his feet hitting them, and she knew that she needed to gain speed. The speed was somehow granted to her by that strange burning feeling she felt, and she sped up, putting distance between herself and Mizuki. She couldn't be the Kyuubi, could she? It wasn't possible. She was human, just a young, orphaned human girl. That thought made her mind whirl. Yes, she was orphaned. Could being the Kyuubi explain why she had no parents? Because she'd never had any? A large, glinting form came towards her, and she had to throw herself to the floor to avoid it. After a moment, she rolled onto her back and looked up and saw Mizuki crouched on a branch above. She pushed herself into a sitting position. Tired of running, fox brat? Mizuki said smoothly, just hand over the scroll, and I will end all of this for you. Seeing that he was receiving no answer, his face flashed. Fine. Have it your way. He toyed with the large shuriken in his hand for a moment, before he pulled it back and launched it at the frozen girl. A rustle, followed by a blur, made it so that Naru did not get injured. Naru stared up, her eyes wide. Iruka-sensei was bent over her, his face set in a mask of pain that he was obviously trying to hide for her sake, and she could easily see the large metal object producing from his back. Iruka-sensei. She stammered in disbelief and shock. Why? Why? Tears came to her eyes and trickled down her tanned cheeks, over the 3 black whisker marks on each one. Because, Naru-chan, you're special to me, Iruka-sensei whispered. Now I want you to run this time. Run straight to the Hokage. Feeling numb, she had no choice but to stagger into the trees, but she did not do as she was told. Instead she fell to her knees. That was a foolish thing to do, Iruka, Mizuki said calmly. Why would you defend her? She killed your parents, killed so many fellow ninja, and you defend her. Why do you not join me and rid yourself of her? I know you once hated her. Quote. Iruka chuckled and shook his head. No, Mizuki, I never hated her, I hated what she held. He said softly, it may have seemed like I hated her, but I didn't understand. I was young and so set on what I thought was right, but I was stupid. How could anyone blame a little girl for what was not her fault? Quote. Naru rubbed at her eyes to stop the tears from Iruka-sensei's words. The burning in her stomach was calming down, becoming duller and duller with each word that her sensei spoke. She's my little sister, and I will defend her, even if I do not survive it. Iruka-sensei finished and leaned against the tree. Mizuki began to laugh loudly, the sound sharp and horrible. He calmed down a minute later. You were always so soft-hearted, Iruka, and easily fell for the lies, he said, wiping his eyes. I'll just have to rid myself of you first, then, won't I? Quote. Something inside Naru snapped. She pushed herself up and rushed out of her hiding place. Don't you dare touch Iruka-sensei. She saw Iruka-sensei's look of annoyance at her still being here, but she stubbornly refused to leave him. Mizuki raised an eyebrow. Fox brat, he said boredly, you're still here. You really don't know when to give up, do you? He walked towards her. What can you do? Glare at me. Quote. Something inside of her felt weird. It was like something was growing inside of her, sprouting and blooming like a newborn tree, and she felt it creaking, and with a small snap, her eyes widened. Around Mizuki trees rose, looking brand new and young, but as tall as trees hundreds of years old. He looked startled and shocked, his eyes wide and his face a mask of disbelief, and he appeared to be too frozen to move. The ground split open and roots appeared, swinging dangerously, and curled around him in a tight embrace. The newly sprouted trees arched and curved, sealing him within a wooden prison. Another feeling also arose, a dangerous, horrible feeling that made her want to rip Mizuki's head from his shoulders or slowly kill him. A fire from inside her warmed until she felt her stomach burning, but she managed to push it down, though it still felt warm. She also had the rather odd feeling that something had woken up. Mokuton, Iruka whispered in pure shock. It didn't seem possible, but the proof was right in front of him. Naru was a Mokuton user. Now over his shock, but still feeling the deep emotion of it, Mizuki howled and attempted to be let free, but the prison he was in sprouted sharp spikes that got him through both arms and pinned him where he was. He let out a pained yell. Naru shook her head to clear it. What had she done? Hearing a groan of pain, she pushed it out of her mind and ran over to Iruka-sensei, who had pushed himself up so that he could lean against a tree. "Sensei, are you okay? Oh God, you're bleeding." The words came out rushed and all garbled together, but Iruka easily understood them, and he smiled gently. "It's just a flesh wound, Naru-chan, I'm fine," Iruka said, brushing off her concern. "But now, I need to give you a gift, so close your eyes." Quote. Feeling even more confused than she had been earlier tonight, she closed her eyes in an attempt to amuse her sensei. She heard Iruka-sensei moving, and heard his pained grunt, but his instructions forced her to keep her eyes closed. After a moment, she felt something press against her forehead, and something was tied just underneath the center of her two pigtails. Her eyes flew open. "Congratulations, Naru-chan," Iruka said with a large and proud beaming smile. Almost hesitantly, Naru reached up to feel the thing on her forehead, and she recognized it as what she had tried on earlier. Cool to the touch, and rectangular, she felt the familiar symbol in the middle. "A high Tate," she gasped, her sapphire orbs shining with delight and pure happiness. "I'm a genin." She then threw herself at her sensei, who caught her and hugged her, but grunted in pain, which made her hastily release him. "Gomen." Quote. Iruka chuckled and shook his head. "It's fine, just a small twinge," he said warmly, before his eyes snapped to the surrounding trees. To his immense relief, a group of 4 Anbu walked out of the trees, their forms seemingly relaxed, but Iruka knew that they were probably tense and slightly relieved to have the scroll back. He saw them stare at the prison that Mizuki was encased in, and he knew they felt the same shock as him. An Anbu, a tall and slender, yet slightly muscular man in a bird mask, was the first to look away, followed seconds later by his team, and he pinned Iruka with a stare that the academy teacher could feel, even though he couldn't see the person's eyes beyond those small slits in the porcelain mask. "You were in need of medical assistance." It was more of a statement than a question, and with a slight gesture of his hand, a woman with a dragon mask came forward, her steps precise and graceful. Dragon knelt down next to Iruka, her gloved hands already glowing green. "Lean forward," she spoke, her voice ringing nicely, but she also sounded like she did yell a lot, and Iruka complied without complaint. Bird turned to the others. "Bear, deal with this traitor," he said, spitting the word traitor with disgust. "Dear." Quote. Bear approached the wooden prison, and Naru could see Mizuki tense slightly and fear enter his eyes. She wasn't that surprised. She'd have been scared too if someone the size of Bear came over to her to deal with her, as Bird had put it. Without being asked, Deer walked over to Naru and looked down at her. "Hello," she said, her voice soft and calming. "Do you have the scroll?" Quote. Naru shook her head. But I do know where it is," she said, rising to her feet. "I hid it in the forest." With a small gesture from Deer, the two set off into the woods in search of the scroll. Bird took slow, graceful steps up to the wooden prison. Betraying Konoha was not a good thing to do, was it? He spoke coldly, and if it was possible for him to do so, he probably would have frozen the whole place with ice. "There is a special place for traitors just like you, scum." Quote. Dragon's healing hands eventually pulled away from Iruka's back, and she stood up, offering a hand to pull him up. Iruka gratefully took it, and despite a slight twinge in his back, it did not hurt as he was pulled up. He rolled his shoulders to loosen the tightness in his back. As soon as she had dropped his hand, Dragon had almost immediately walked over to Bird's side. "I can sense Deer and Uzumaki-san returning with the scroll," she said quietly, and her superior nodded his thanks. Deer and Naru walked out of the trees, the former holding the scroll as if it were a precious treasure. She walked over to Bird, who nodded. Naru returned to Iruka-sensei's side and beamed up at him. "You're healed," she said in delight, and sent Dragon a grateful smile, and she wasn't sure, but she could have sworn she felt the female Anbu return the smile from beneath the mask. "Yumino," Bird said coolly as he approached, "Hokage-sama will want to speak to the both of you, on certain matters." He turned his head to the scroll, and then to the wooden prison that was now empty of Mizuki. He then swiftly turned around and left with his fellow Anbu. Only Iruka and Naru were left. "Well, this has been a very tiring night," Iruka said, placing a hand on his student's shoulder. "I'm sure Hokage-sama will understand if we don't see him until tomorrow." Quote. Naru let out a loud yawn and nodded, her eyelids threatening to droop shut. "I'm sorry, Iruka-sensei, I shouldn't have." "It's okay," Iruka soothed as he led the small blonde from the woods. "You've said you're sorry, and you mean it, and that's all that matters." Quote. The events of last night proved to be draining, much more than Naru had expected and thought normal, but she supposed she couldn't be too shocked. What she had done last night, all that wood that had trapped Mizuki Baka, it was amazing, is all that she could say. So when she woke up with arms feeling like to huge weights, and her legs like lead, she wasn't that surprised, maybe a little annoyed, but not surprised. The sluggish feeling soon disappeared as she moved around her dingy apartment doing her morning ritual, which included putting the kettle on to boil, and trying to do everything in that short of time: wash her face, clean her teeth, brush her hair and put it up into the normal ponytail and get dressed in that hideous orange jumpsuit for the day ahead. By the time she got back to the kitchen the kettle had boiled, and she quickly poured the scalding water into the instant ramen and hurried to eat it all. As she walked down the street, her mind whirling with what she could do today, she had a slight inkling in the back of her head that she was forgetting something important that she had to do today. But what was it? Well, it couldn't be that important if she couldn't remember it. It was when she turned a corner to make her way to the park that she was cornered by an Anbu, and she instantly tried to think of what she couldn't have done wrong. Naru Uzumaki. Quote. She looked up at the bird mask and blinked. "Yes," she said suspiciously. Bird looked down at her. "Hokage-sama requests to see you," came the cold voice from beneath the mask, and it triggered a memory from last night. "You," she said, "you were there last night, weren't you? In the forest, after well, you know." She smiled sheepishly. "Hi." Quote. Naru smiled cheerfully. "Okie dokie, now that's over with, let's go and see the old man Hokage," she exclaimed, pointing towards the Hokage tower in a dramatic fashion. Bird simply turned and walked down the road towards the tower, and Naru had to rush to keep up with his long strides. Obviously, it was not long before she became bored, and decided to entertain herself. "Sue, do you ever take that mask off?" Quote. "Hi." Quote. "Can you see out of it?" Quote. "Hi." Quote. "Can you breathe properly?" Quote. "Hi." Quote. "Do you get to choose any animal mask you want?" Quote. "Hi." Quote. "Do you ever say more than word one?" Quote. Quote. By the time the two got to the tower, Naru had managed to ask every question she could think of. Most were the most annoying ones she could think of. Poor Bird was ready to do the only thing an Anbu would never do: run away screaming. Bird practically shoved Naru into the tower before he walked away quickly, muttering something along the lines of, "She'd be a good interrogator." Quote. With a smile that could scare off anyone that knew her, she skipped into the Hokage tower and up to the office she spent a lot of time in, and she paid no heed to the glares being directed her way. "Ji-san," she announced, flinging the door open and effectively startling the old man in the room. Sarutobi glared at the young genin without any real heat, before he cleared his throat and gestured to one of the chairs in front of his desk. "Take a seat, Naru-chan," he said in such a calm voice that she was a bit worried, but she didn't show it. Naru closed the door behind her, walked over to the desk, dropped into the chair, and put her feet up on the desk. She looked rather relaxed as the third Hokage glared at her, his eyebrow twitching, which seemed to happen a lot whenever she was there. "I assume, by your confused look, that you did forget what Iruka-sensei told you last night," he said. Naru blinked in confusion. "Your genin photo for your ID, Naru-chan, remember?" Sarutobi said with a patience that only he and Iruka possessed when it came to Naru. He watched as her eyes widened in slight realization. "Oh," she said, and she finally remembered what she'd forgotten earlier, and she wished she hadn't. She looked concerned for a whole second, before she shrugged. "If it's all good and well, I'd rather not. I'm not into this whole taking a picture thing, so if you don't mind, I'll be going." "It doesn't matter if you're not into it," Sarutobi interrupted her. It's for your genin ID, no ID photo, no graduating. Quote. Naru's mouth opened and closed for a moment, before she sighed and said, in a defeated tone, fine, fine, when is it? Quote. Since you missed the first one, it is in an hour, below the Hokage monument, Sarutobi said with a small smile, and he put his pipe back into between his teeth. Whatever, Naru muttered as she stood up, and with a withering look at her grandfather figure, she stormed from the room. Remember to show up, he warned, and all he received was a slamming of the door. He shook his head in fondness. No wonder he didn't miss his own daughter's teenage years. Naru had never really planned to go to the photo thing because she figured that the old man would let her off since he liked her so much, but when, nearly an hour later, she noticed the two shadows lurking by the ramen stall she always went to, she was suspicious. Hey, Chuki-san, she said, gaining the attention of the old ramen stall owner who turned to her, a kind expression on his face. I'm going, arigato for the free food. Quote. To celebrate her becoming a genin, Chuki had treated her to 2 free bowls of ramen. He smiled warmly. No problem, he answered cheerfully, congratulations on becoming a genin, though, I know you'll do well. Quote. She beamed at him and stood up, but she also noticed that the shadows moved towards her. Right, see ya, she said, and went to make a mad dash for it, but the shadows became people, and she found her way blocked. She looked up and into the masked faces of 2 Anbu. What is it with you Anbu stalking me these days? All of them seemed to be intent on finding her. A man and woman with masks of a tiger and cat stood there, the former obviously being a young man with a muscular form, but not overly so like Bear from last night, and cat was obviously a woman with a lithe and slender body, and the roundness of her chest didn't hide anything, either. Hokage-sama has asked us to make sure you arrive at your appointment on time, Tiger said calmly, his voice deep and soothing. Naru's lips formed a pout. I was going to go there now, she lied brightly, but she could almost feel the amused look the male Anbu gave her, and she deflated. Fine, led me to my doom. Cat stepped forward and gestured in the direction of the Hokage monument, and with a massive pout, the young blonde walked there. Cat followed her. Tiger shook his head and followed after the two. Having arrived at the place within a few minutes, Naru disappeared into the room provided to get ready for the photo, and she chuckled slightly as she pulled face paint out of her pockets. She peered out of the curtains and saw Tiger and Cat lingering around the edge, and she sighed. It seemed the two had been told to make sure she stayed and had her picture taken. She turned back to the mirror and got to work on her art. After 10 minutes, the curtains opened. Beneath her mask, Cat's eyes widened slowly, before she turned her head to prevent an amused sound being heard. Tiger shook his head and heaved a quiet sigh. Why him? The photographer looked doubtful as Naru sat down on the chair, her expression innocent underneath the layer of face paint. You sure, kid, this is going on your ID, he said. Take it, Naru said happily. With a loud click, followed by a flash, her picture was taken. Once that was done, she turned to Tiger and Cat, but she no longer saw them, and she assumed that they'd disappeared as soon as the picture was taken. Damn, they were fast. She stood up and walked back into the curtained room to wipe the face paint off. That was so worth it. Headaches were becoming far too common with Naru around. Sarutobi sighed as he rubbed his temples, his pipe held loosely in between his teeth, and it moved as he spoke. Naru, this is not acceptable. He looked at the photo he had thrown on his desk, the photo that did have Naru in, only covered in face paint. Why not? Naru sounded genuinely confused. It has me in it, doesn't it? If the Hokage didn't know her so well, he would have fallen for her false confused act, but he was aware of her acting skills. Naru-chan, no one will be able to tell that this is you, he said calmly, this is for your ninja ID. It is very important that other villages are able to tell who you are when you go on missions, you'll have to take it again. Then, just to show that he was serious, he went to rip up the picture, but Naru jerking forward stopped him. Okay, I get it, she said hastily, I'll have my photo retaken, just don't rip that up. I like it. She relaxed when he dropped the photo in a top drawer desk and closed it and locked it. She sighed and leaned back in the chair that should have her name on it, and rested her feet on the desk. It was then that her attention was drawn to the door, which had been flung open, and she was slightly startled to see a young boy, maybe 3 years younger than her, charge in holding a kunai, shouting, "I'll defeat you this time, old man. And I'll become Hokage." But luck was not on his side as the long blue scarf he was wearing proved to be too long for his short body, and he tripped as it caught under his feet. He hit the floor loudly. Naru let out a loud laugh which earned her an angry and embarrassed glare from the young boy, but, for his sake, as she knew what it was like to be in his position, she calmed down a bit, but she was sure her eyes were laughing. She looked at Ji-san, who seemed slightly embarrassed and amused. "Konohamaru," he muttered. The little boy, Konohamaru, jumped to his feet. "Who are you laughing at?" He yelled at Naru, who blinked and pointed at him as if it were obvious. "Do you know who I am?" Quote. Naru trailed off, staring at the little boy. He had a weird hat covering his spiky brown hair, and he had deep brown eyes which looked familiar, but other than that, she really had no clue. "Nope." Quote. Konohamaru looked shocked, and a bit hopeful, as he stared back at her in dumbfoundedness, before he raised himself up to his whole height of about 4 feet. "I am Konohamaru Sarutobi, grandson of the 3rd Hokage," he announced, sounding very much like a spoiled brat. Huh, there were similarities, thought Naru as she looked at Ji-san again. He nodded to confirm the young boy's announcement. She turned back to the brunette boy. "So," she said, unsure of what reaction the boy wanted. "Didn't you hear me?" Konohamaru yelled. "Oh, I heard you," Naru said, "but I wouldn't care more if you were a prince of the world. To me, you're a spoiled little boy who trips over his own scarf." Quote. It was then that someone else burst in, a tall and skinny man wearing a Chunin outfit of blue, minus the green jacket they usually sported from their Chunin years, and he had on a blue bandana and a pair of black sunglasses. He looked ready to shout, but when he saw Naru lounging rather unrespectfully in front of the Hokage, he swelled up with indignation. It was the fox brat. Naru seemed to feel the glare and turned back to look at him. Her eyes narrowed at him when she noticed his body language. She may seem completely dumb to others, and yes, she wasn't the smartest person, but she could read people's body languages. It helped to know when people were coming for her when she was younger. "Honorable grandson," the man declared, turning to Konohamaru, who looked sulky. "Why did you run off?" Quote. "Ebisu-san," Sarutobi said tiredly, "he came to defeat me again." This was, apparently, a regular occurrence. Ebisu sighed loudly and dramatically. "Honorable grandson, you cannot hope to defeat Hokage-sama if you do not stay and learn." He then glared at Naru. "May I ask what this girl is doing here?" Why was she so close to his student? Seeing his granddaughter figure welling up to say something she probably had no way of knowing how it would sound, Sarutobi quickly cut in. "Naru-chan came to talk to me about her Chunin ID photo," he said, and leveled the man with a disappointed look, which seemed to make the man deflate. He turned back to the young girl, and found that she was already standing up and looking a bit annoyed. "Naru, you will retake the photo later, understood?" Quote. Naru made a protesting noise. "Show some respect to Hokage-sama," Ebisu said angrily, putting his hands on his hips in outrage, but the girl had other ideas. "I think it looks fine, old man." Quote. The man made a strangled noise. Sarutobi stared at her. "Fine," she said, "I'm going now. Have fun." She turned to leave, but threw a dark look at Ebisu, and looked at Konohamaru. "See ya, brat." She then left the office. "Do not speak to the honorable grandson like that," Ebisu shouted after her, before he turned to the 3rd Hokage, who sighed loudly. Konohamaru was staring in the direction Naru had left, a thoughtful look on his face. Ebisu looked at his leader, a look of annoyance on his face. "Hokage-sama, is it wise to allow that girl near your grandson?" he asked, choosing his words carefully in front of the elderly ninja, who was known to view the fox brat as his own grandchild. Sarutobi's eyes hardened. "Ebisu," he began, sounding severely disappointed, "I thought you were old enough to move past these silly things." Quote. The special Chunin quickly tried to come up with another excuse, because when Hokage-sama got mad, he became furious. "Ah, forgive me, Hokage-sama, but that did not come out quite as I planned," he lied. "I simply meant that Uzumaki-san has a history of troublemaking." It was obvious, judging by the look he cast out the window at the Hokage faces, that he hadn't forgotten what the girl had done. Sarutobi smiled. His eyes, however, were drawn to his grandson as he slipped from the room, probably to go and follow Naru. He didn't mind his grandson going to be friends with the blonde girl. He feared what things Konohamaru would learn from Naru now that she was obviously in a bad mood. She tended to get worse in a bad mood. He looked out the window as Ebisu continued to rant out the reasons why the honorable grandson should not be allowed near Uzumaki-san. He looked at the fourth Hokage's stone face, and he could just imagine it real and made of flesh, youthful without the stress of the attack, and lined with laughter and glee at such a prank pulled. Which is why I do not think the honorable grandson should be allowed near that girl, Ebisu said just as Sarutobi pulled away from his thoughts. Well, it's too late for that, the third Hokage said, nodding his head in the direction where his grandson stood a few minutes ago. It was quite comical to see Ebisu's face go into panic, and he quickly looked around as if expecting Konohamaru to have moved, before he realized his superior's words, and he raced out of the office, yelling, "Honorable grandson! Come back!" Sarutobi chuckled. He could have warned Ebisu when Konohamaru had been sneaking away, but who says an old man couldn't have fun once in a while? Now, Naru wasn't like the older ninjas who had that super I can sense everyone thing going, but she did know when she was being followed, and she had the feeling she knew exactly who it was. She left it for a few minutes, and walked down random streets just to prove that she was being followed, and after leading her follower down an empty street, she turned around, arms crossed, and a raised eyebrow. Her follower, obviously Konohamaru, saw her looking, and he quickly dived behind a lamppost. Really, couldn't he do better than that? I can see you, you know, Naru said, shaking her head. He didn't emerge, but she did see his head peek round slightly, and she crossed her arms. Come on, that's terrible hiding. You know what, just get out here and tell me what you want. Konohamaru emerged from his hiding place, with the air of someone who had an important question. So, what do you want? Train me. Naru's voice abruptly faded as her eyes widened in shock. Hold on, had he just said what she thought he said? Say what? She had to make sure she wasn't hearing things. Konohamaru sighed in annoyance but repeated himself. I want you to train me. Nope, she wasn't hearing things then. She wasn't quite sure what to say. What makes you think I can teach you anything? She was hoping to derail him with that question. She wasn't much of a student type herself, so having someone ask her to train them was a ridiculous thought. Sadly, luck was not in her favor, as Konohamaru grinned at her, as though he had been expecting this question, and had the perfect answer for it. You're an academy student, right? He said, you can teach me all the stuff you're learning there. I'm a genin, actually, Naru said, became one yesterday. It was only then did she realize that she shouldn't have said that, for Konohamaru's eyes widened in shock and pure delight. So you can teach me. He beamed brightly. If you're a genin, then you must know a lot, right? Damn it to all, look, don't you have that bandana idiot to teach you stuff? She said, turning to walk back down the little path she'd purposely led Konohamaru up, and the little Sarutobi eagerly followed her like a little puppy. Konohamaru sighed loudly. Well, yeah, I suppose, he said sadly, but Ebisu-sensei is a special Junin, and he teaches Hokage hopefuls, but that also means he treats me differently, and he only teaches me the stupid book stuff. He frowned angrily, and he also says that the academy is useless to me if I want to become Hokage. Naru raised an eyebrow. Well, she wanted to be Hokage, but she certainly wasn't going to go to Bandana Idiot for help, not with that attitude. But every ninja in this village has been to the academy, including Ji-san, she said. I know, he said with another loud sigh, before he grinned at her. So, can you teach me? You've got to know quite a bit to become a genin, right? Could you teach me that stuff? She hesitated. Brat, it's really not that easy, she said, tucking her fringe behind her ear. I became a genin in a slightly different way than normal, and I don't really know the simple stuff. Well, I can't really do the simple stuff. Konohamaru drooped slightly, before he beamed again. But you know the theory of it, right? You know what can be done and all that stuff, he said eagerly. You don't give up, do you? Naru asked, shaking her head in amusement, because in all honesty, he reminded her of herself. It actually gave her something to think about. On one hand, she really didn't know how to do much of the academy stuff. Everyone could vouch that she was crap at everything there. She didn't have the time to teach anyone, and plus, she really didn't want to teach anyone, either. But, on the other hand, taking Konohamaru under her wing would most certainly annoy the hell out of that bandana idiot, right? Alright, I'll make you a deal, she said, a mischievous smile curving her lips, one that foretold trouble. First, I want to try something. You pass my little test, and I'll agree to teach you. Quote. With an eager Konohamaru listening with rapt attention, she led him away to begin her plan to cause trouble. Unbeknown to the two young people, 6 Anbu stood atop a building, all in various positions as they watched. We should really stop them, Kat said, but she made no sign of following through on her words. That's Hokage-sama's grandson. We really don't need him turning into a prankster like Uzumaki. Quote. Dragon leaned back against the wall next to Tiger. It's just a bit of harmless fun, she said, and besides, she knows quite a lot if you think about it. At least, if someone were to ever attempt to kidnap Hokage-sama's grandson, he would be able to escape them, should he learn from Uzumaki's unique way of training. Quote. Bird looked at the healer of his team. You just want more amusement in Konoha, don't you? He said knowingly, and although his voice was cold, his team could easily hear the amusement. You have to admit, the girl is quite talented when she puts her mind to it, Dragon pointed out, before she looked up at the sky. We need to get going. Quote. Hi, all of them said. Each one gave a last, lingering look at Naru's retreating back, before they disappeared in swirls of leaves. Quote. Quote. Konohamaru stared blankly at Naru, who was standing in front of him with her arms crossed, beaming widely and looking highly impressed with herself. Why you want me to what? Quote. The two of them were stood in the middle of the bustling marketplace, hopefully keeping out of sight of prying eyes that wanted to find them. Help me prank bandana idiot, she said for the 5th time, and this time it was followed by a loud, exasperated sigh. Look, pranking isn't as easy as it looks, ya know. You have to be able to sneak around without being seen, get a load of things to do the prank, and then actually do the prank without being seen as well, and you can't leave behind a trail to lead it back to you. She didn't usually put a lot of thought into things, but when it came to her passion, pranking, she could spend days going over final details. Normally, she would think up pranks in seconds, and make them up as she goes along, but some things needed final details. By the end of her little speech, Konohamaru was looking a little shocked at all the thought she put into it, before he looked a little doubtful. If I pull this off, you'll teach me. Quote. If, Naru said, stressing the word, you do pull it off, I'll happily teach you some things. It's a promise. That meant she would have to go and quickly look some things up in the academy, and even though she wasn't good at theory, nor would she be good at the jutsu, probably, but she could help him along. She kept to her promises. Besides, the thought of having an accomplice was too a tempting offer to pass over. Doubt gave way to excitement as Konohamaru bounced on the balls of his feet. Okay, so what do we do first? Quote. Naru glanced back down the street. She could see bandana idiot searching down every alley for Konohamaru. She turned back to the young boy and smiled. First of all, we need to stay hidden, she said and grabbed Konohamaru's wrist. Come on. She then pulled him after her as she weaved through the crowds. Ebisu arrived only seconds later to look at the place they'd just been. Do you know where bandana idiot lives? Quote. Ebisu-sensei, Konohamaru said, frowning slightly. Hi, sure, I've been there a few times to read and stuff, why? He saw Naru's evil smile and his eyes widened. You want me to prank Ebisu-sensei? Quote. Naru looked around before she came to a stop. Look, it's a rite of passage to prank your sensei. I did so with Iruka-sensei, and then you can prank to your heart's content, she said happily. So, where is it? Quote. Konohamaru sighed, but jerked his head in a random direction. I'll show you, he grumbled, and walked off ahead. She followed him with a beaming smile. This would be so fun. They arrived not too long later at a large apartment, which was in the nicer part of Konoha. Idiot left a window open, Naru said, shaking her head as she walked down the side of the apartment to see a window open. Right, Konohamaru, you first. Although he looked worried, she had to give him credit when he puffed up, walked over to the window, and climbed in after a little leg up from her. She followed after him. Once she landed on the carpeted floor, she stood up and looked around. It was decorated in plain colors with furniture scattered around neatly, and books lined shelves, but it didn't really feel homey. Ninjas, she supposed, were never at home long enough to make it feel all warm and comforting. That was a part she was looking forward to, not being in that dingy apartment for long. So, what are we going to do? Konohamaru asked, looking highly uncomfortable at being in his sensei's apartment without permission. He was beginning to regret this, but if he could do this, then Naru would agree to teach him, and he would learn more than the stupid, boring book stuff. Naru stood in the middle of the wide open space that was the living room and smiled brightly. She repeated, we're not going to do anything, you are going to do something while I wait. To prove her point, she sat down on one of the leather sofas and rested into it as if it were in her own home. Konohamaru made a squeaking noise and he suddenly looked a whole lot more nervous about being in his sensei's apartment. This is my first time doing this, can't you, help me? Quote. She shook her head with a cheerfully bright smile curving her lips. Off you go, she said, flapping her hands at him as if to dismiss him. With a look similar to the one a man going to Hallows would sport, Konohamaru trooped off to find something, anything, to do as a prank. Once she was sure he was out of sight and hearing, Naru quickly got up from the sofa and decided to do her own little searching, just to amuse herself. She saw a photo up on the mantelpiece over the open fire, a photo of 3 11-year-olds, with a Junin standing behind them. 2 boys, one with brown hair and dark eyes, one with light brown hair and bright green eyes, a girl with messy auburn hair and striking gray eyes, and the Junin had spiky black hair and bored dark brown eyes. It must be Bandana Idiot's Genin team. What to do, what to DM? She walked over to the bookcase, her interest perked by the ridiculously bright orange spine of a thin book, and when she pulled it off the shelf, she recognized it as one of the ones she'd caught Ji-san reading a few times. Closet perv. With a slightly evil grin, she reached for a random pen that had been thrown on top of the bookcase and began her art work. By the time Konohamaru walked back in, she'd rearranged the whole living room and was looking quite satisfied with herself. This is so, he muttered, and he held up some of Ebisu's underwear. Naru hadn't expected anything different, really. Going for people's underwear was the first thing someone thought of when pranking, or the old bucket of water over the door trick. Oh, this could work, she muttered, yeah, this could work. I'm thinking. A flag, Konohamaru suggested eagerly, having apparently decided that he liked this idea. He was picking up quickly. A flag, I like it, Naru nodded, come on, our work here is done. Quote. The two then crept out the way they'd snuck in and ran off to do a prank. It was not too long later that the two young troublemakers were now sat on a patch of grass near a place where ninjas trained. Well, it's official, Naru announced, I guess I'll teach you things. She'd been half hoping that this would be a big failure because she really didn't want to help anyone when even she wasn't that good at stuff. Not that she'd ever admit that to anyone, she'd only been made a ninja because she kicked a traitor's ass, but the kid had done as she asked, and it was a pretty good prank for a first-timer. Konohamaru beamed. The moment, however, was interrupted by Ebisu appearing, looking flustered, as if he'd been running all over the place. Honorable grandson, he said loudly, I've been looking all over the place for you. What were you thinking running off with the faux girl? She is a bad influence. Quote. Naru's eyes darkened. She held no doubt over what he'd just been about to call her. Her anger, however, was calmed when she remembered what she'd done to his apartment, and other things. Yeah, well. Naru Uzumaki. Quote. All three of them looked to the side where an Anbu, dragon, stood quite casually. Hokage-sama sent me to retrieve you and take you to get your picture taken again, she said, and then he has requested to speak with you about the other night. Quote. Naru bit her lip. In all of the excitement, she'd forgotten that Ji-san still wanted to talk to her about her little stealing of the scroll, and she'd figured he wasn't that angry. Okay, she said with a sigh and stood up. She looked at Konohamaru, who was looking disappointed. We'll carry on another day, okay? Quote. Konohamaru smiled and nodded. Ebisu's face went red, and he looked ready to protest, but he had no chance. Dragon began to walk away, and Naru had to hurry to catch up with the long strides, even though the female Anbu wasn't incredibly tall, but she'd probably been a few inches over Naru's height in her own youth. Good one, Dragon said quietly and nodded her head in the direction that Naru and Konohamaru had set up their prank. Naru beamed. After getting her photo done correctly this time, Naru was led by Dragon to the Hokage Tower, and her bad feeling increased. Did Ji-san want to talk to her, or yell at her? She was surprised that she hadn't been yelled at yet, especially considering that she'd stolen something valuable to the village. Go in, Dragon said, opening the Hokage's office door, and Naru walked in. The Anbu closed the door, did some hand signs, and then disappeared in a swirl of leaves. Naru sat in her regular chair in front of the large oak desk, which was occupied by Sarutobi on the other side. He looked unusually grave, which made her think that yes, she was definitely in trouble. I am so sorry. She burst out. I know it was wrong of me to steal the scroll. I had no idea. I wouldn't have stolen if I'd known the truth. That Baka Mizuki tricked me. I'm so. Naru-chan, you're not in trouble, Sarutobi said gently, amusement in his voice as the girl's voice abruptly stopped, her mouth snapping shut. I'm not, she said in relief, before she sat back against the chair she'd been leaning forward in. Well, that was a relief, she thought, and then she frowned and asked, what am I here for then? Quote. Sarutobi sighed and placed his pipe down on the table. Naru-chan, do you remember what you did the other night? Quote. She tilted her head in a confused manner. I stole the scroll, she said unsurely. He knew that already, so why was he asking? He said, I mean, do you remember what you did to Mizuki? Why was he always left with the difficult conversations? Naru paused for a moment, her eyes going misty as she was lost in memory. Wood, she murmured, I made wood come out of the ground and grab Mizuki Baka, didn't I? A pleased smile curved her lips at the thought of Mizuki getting his just punishment. She came back to reality and shrugged. I don't know how I did it, if that's what you're asking. Quote. Oh, I know how you did it, Sarutobi said pleasantly, and he threaded his fingers, the ones that had formed so many hand seals in his lifetime, together. I just can't think of how to tell you. He had learnt that lying, or masking the truth, never really worked with Naru, as she usually found out the truth in her own way, anyway, and then she got incredibly angry, and the village suffered. It was something he could rather do without. Naru's confusion was visible on her face. It's just a ninja thing, right? I bet loads of people can do it, she said, but even her own words did not convince her. She'd read about wood jutsu somewhere before, in the academy, but she just couldn't remember where. Naru-chan, he said gently, there has only ever been 2 people in all of Konoha, that I know of, who could do what you did to Mizuki last night. Quote. 2. Naru repeated, before her face lit up slightly and Sarutobi knew what she was going to ask before she even opened her mouth. My parents. Quote. Sarutobi sighed. I'm afraid not, Naru-chan, he said sadly, but, as his eyes flickered, unseen, over to the portrait that held a young man with hair and eyes identical to the girl in front of him, he wondered if that were true. The users of that wood ability, the Mokuton, are. His eyes strayed over to the first portrait that held a man with long dark hair, tanned skin and warm brown eyes. The first Hokage. Naru nearly shrieked, but she managed to keep her voice down, though she did sit forward in her seat. I have the same ability he did. Now she remembered where she'd read about the Mokuton, in the academy, in a history book, during one of the few lessons she'd managed to sit still in. No need to mention that she had been strapped to her chair, her hands tightly bound because she was notorious for being able to escape if her hands were movable. Sarutobi sighed loudly. How could he explain this in a way that wouldn't lead Naru-chan to overreacting? Naru-chan, the Mokuton is a bloodline, he said calmly, and, as predicted, the girl just looked confused. You really don't spend much time in the academy, do you? Quote. Naru flushed in embarrassment and shrugged. I can't sit still, she admitted sheepishly and rubbed the back of her neck, much like a certain parent of hers. Anyway, what's a bloodline? Quote, a bloodline is passed down through the family, through the blood, Sarutobi explained, watching her reaction, and he smiled slightly when her eyes widened slightly. She may not be the smartest person in Konoha, but she certainly wasn't dumb. Which allows the child or children to inherit that skill. Since he knew that there was no way that Orochimaru had been able to experiment on Naru-chan like he had with Yamato, there was only one other option: she was related to the first Hokage. Are you saying I'm related to him? She pointed a finger at the portrait to further her words, I'm related to the first Hokage. That means I'm also related to the second Hokage because they were brothers. She jumped out of her seat with a rush of excitement. Oh, wait until I tell Sasuke Baka. There's no wa. You can't. Quote, Naru deflated. Why not? She demanded, crossing her arms over her chest. People'll stop picking on me then. Quote, Naru-chan, if anyone were to find out that you held the Shodime's Mokuton ability, Sarutobi trailed off, shaking his head. Even he couldn't imagine what would happen. There are many people out there who want that ability, Naru-chan, and they will do anything to get it. Anything. He didn't want to worry her, but he had to make his point clear that it would be a danger to even mention that there was a possibility of someone being born naturally with that ability. She slumped back into her seat and allowed her arms to fall to her sides. What's so good about it anyway? She mumbled. The Shodime was a force to be reckoned with because of that skill, Sarutobi said, sounding, and feeling, like a teacher again. The ability to control wood with only a few hand seals was incredible, and, because it was his power, it was desired. He sighed. I understand your need to tell everyone, Naru-chan, but won't it be better to not tell anyone and keep it to yourself? Quote. Naru shrugged. To you, maybe, she said, and she did think about telling people, but she saw the Hokage's eyes narrow, and she knew he knew exactly what she was thinking. Naru, you're not allowed to tell anyone, do you understand? Sarutobi said, his voice forceful, and she quickly nodded. She'd never heard him use that voice, well, not with her, anyway. I don't mean to be horrible about this, but you must understand, there are some people out there. Not wanting to further the bad mood Ji-san was in, she nodded. What if I end up using it while out on a mission? She said, I can't exactly control it, can I? If what Ji-san said was true, then she'd be pretty screwed if she was on a mission and roots randomly shot out of the ground. She doubted she would be able to explain it. Sarutobi appeared to have expected this question because he pulled out an old wooden box that was neatly crafted and smooth. Which is why you will be learning to control it, he said, setting the box down in front of him. Naru leaned forward to get a better look at the curious and pretty box. What's in there? She asked interestedly, her eyes sparking with a childish light at the thought of what could possibly be in there. He chuckled. He ran his fingers along the smooth edges of the box, hooked his fingertips under them and carefully opened it as if it were a priceless treasure. These are Mokuton scrolls that I managed to dig out when I discovered your ability just a day ago, he said, peering down into the box filled with some old scrolls that hadn't been opened in a long time, not since the time of the Shodime. Hey, didn't you say there were two people? She pointed out, you've only mentioned one. Quote. Sarutobi smiled. He thought she would pick up on that sooner or later. The other one is alive right now, he said, but he is not any relation of yours, I'm afraid. He came by the Mokuton, unnaturally, you could say. Quote. Oh, Naru said, frowning slightly and looking thoughtful. He wasn't born with it, you mean? Sarutobi shook his head and she frowned even more. She could see that he seemed a bit uneasy to talk about it, and a bit sad, and she felt slight sympathy for the person they were talking about. What had happened to him to make him be able to use the Mokuton? Anyway, he said, attempting to change the subject, and, thankfully, she seemed willing to. These scrolls hold jutsus that only Mokuton users can master. Quote. She smiled brightly. Jutsus only I can use? She asked excitedly, nearly bouncing with excitement at being able to be one of two people who were able to use the wood thing. Hi, Sarutobi said, opening the box, and he pulled out an old scroll that looked as if it had seen better days. He laid it out in front of him and looked back up at Naru, who was watching him with rapt attention, her expression curious. These are very delicate, Naru-chan, and the only ones still in existence, please be careful with them. Quote. Naru nodded solemnly. Can I have them now? Her hands flexed, as if wanting to reach out and grab the box herself, but at least she contained herself. Sarutobi chuckled. He picked up the scroll he had just lain out on the desk. I'll give you this one first, he said kindly. It is one containing lower-level jutsus, which are perfect for you, since you only discovered the ability last night. I was more than surprised that you did something like that when you weren't aware. Quote. Naru beamed proudly. Hopefully, now, you'll mature, he said warmly. The blonde nodded hastily. I can see you growing up already, I am very proud. Just then, a feminine scream rang throughout Konoha, but it clearly belonged to a man. Both inhabitants of the room looked at the window. Sarutobi turned back to Naru. She smiled sheepishly and shrugged. Maturing would have to wait just a little while longer. There were times in young Naru's life when she had contemplated giving up, on just letting everything go, but she hadn't been like that in about 4 or 5 years. It was around that time when she lost hope, for some reason that she couldn't quite remember, but she'd regained her spirit quickly, and set about trying to change the way everyone in Konoha thought about her. It was one of those times when she should have given up on trying to learning the Mokuton after the first 2 failed attempts, but her stubbornness won out, and she managed to make a little tree grow out of a plant pot. Nothing like the amazing wooden cage she'd created, but it was something, though she couldn't help but feel disappointed about it. She was rather impatient, as she had been told a few times, and she normally wished that she could do a jutsu straight away, but it seemed that with a bloodline, it took a lot of time. For a week she trained with her bloodline, making the tiny tree grow until it was at least 5 foot. She decided, at that time, she would keep the tree as a sign of her hard work. It also had something to do with the fact that the tree was now taller than her and she couldn't actually move it, although she had managed to shift it into the corner and out of the way. The tree actually brightened up her dingy apartment. Far too soon did the day of graduation come, and Naru was unable to train daily now, as she knew that being a real ninja would guaranteed take up her time. Still, she could hardly contain her excitement on that Monday morning as she walked into the academy classroom for what may be the last time, until she got into trouble with Iruka-sensei, which would probably be some time within the next month. As expected, she was greeted with confusion as she walked up to her usual seat and fell into it, resting her feet on the table. Just a few seats away was one of her old friends, Shikamaru Nara, who had slowly drifted away from her, as did Choji Amikichi, who remained best friends with Shikamaru, as was shown how he was sitting next to the sleepy boy, and Kiba Inuzuka, who was a lone wolf, bar his furry companion, Akamaru. Together, the 4 of them used to get into a lot of trouble that she would always remember fondly, because those days had been some of the best in her life. What are you doing here? Shikamaru questioned, regarding her with sleepy brown eyes, as if she had just interrupted a very important time. Sleep. This room is for graduatees only. Choji, who was chomping away on one of his seemingly never-ending bags of crisps, nodded in agreement. Naru tapped the high tape given to her by Iruka-sensei. See this, she said smugly, and Shikamaru's eyes wandered up to it. I am a ninja now. Quote. He blinked at her. When did you pass? He asked, raising a lazy eyebrow. She shrugged. Same day you did, she said brightly, her eyes twinkling with a secret she wasn't bound to tell him. She may not be the quietest person in Konoha, but she certainly knew how to keep a secret, especially when it was her own. Her cheeky smile told him that she knew perfectly well what he was thinking, and it was amusing her. Shikamaru grunted. I'm going back to sleep, he said, his sentence ending in a loud yawn, and his eyes slid shut as he rested his head on his folded arms. Within seconds, he was fast asleep. Naru grinned and turned to look at the rest of the class. By now, everyone had lost their interest in her entering the room and they were now talking amongst themselves. That she could live with, as long as everyone knew that she was now a ninja. More time passed, and one by one, more people filed into the room. Some stopped to stare at Naru, but carried on after a moment, speaking in hushed tones to their friends. Sasuke Uchiha had probably been in the room from sunrise, because he was sitting at his usual desk, in his usual way, like a brooding statue with duck butt hair. He was, surprisingly, without either stalkers by his side, though Naru had no doubt that they would be along soon, and he too seemed to have that thought because his eyes would flicker over to the door every time it opened. The shy Hinata Hyuga had walked in 10 minutes after Naru had arrived, her thumbs twiddling as usual, and her lavender eyes scanning the room. They fell on Naru, and a small smile crossed her lips, but it was gone in a second, replaced by a shy thing. She went and sat by Kiba, who had sported a crush on her for a few weeks, and he and Akamaru happily greeted her. Naru knew that Akamaru wasn't the only one who wanted to greet her with a kiss. Shino Aburame was sitting in the corner, quieter than even Sasuke. He was hard to read, since a coat was always covering half of his face, while his eyes were covered by sunglasses. Not once had anyone ever seen his eyes. Naru toyed with the idea that they were put on Shino as soon as he was born. The others that were in the room were people that Naru did not really know. Soon enough, there was an all too familiar thundering of footsteps down the corridor outside, coming towards the door. Sasuke tensed, almost unnoticeably, but an amused Naru was watching him like a hawk. She enjoyed watching him be uncomfortable. As predicted, the door slid open with a loud bang, and two girls, one blonde-haired and blue-eyed, the other pink-haired and green-eyed with a large forehead, were both trying to get in through the door, shoving at each other when they realized that they had jammed each other in the doorway. "Move, Ino pig," the pinkett, Sakura Haruno, screeched. "No way, forehead girl. You move." Ino Yamanaka snapped back, her blue eyes glowing furiously. "I'm sitting next to Sasuke-kun this time. He wants me there." Quote. If Sasuke showed any emotion, Naru guessed he would be rapidly shaking his head now, a panicked look on his cold face. That image caused a smile to cross her lips, and she settled back to watch the show. Somehow, the two girls managed to shove their way through the door, with the result ending up as both of them falling to the floor with thuds. This did not affect them, or falter their intentions, as they jumped up only seconds later and held a mini race to get to where Sasuke sat. Bets could be held here, Naru thought ideally, and maybe it would earn her a bit of money. "I'm sitting there," Sakura yelled, pulling a dirty move by attempting to trip Ino, who knew the trick all too well and jumped over the offending limb, and pushed her ex-friend. This would have gone on for some time, but it was interrupted by the door opening once more. "Ino Yamanaka, Sakura Haruno," Iruka-sensei's voice shouted over the noise, "stop being so silly and sit down." Quote. There was a triumphant cry as Sakura got the seat next to Sasuke, and Ino, with a sulking pout, sat next to the pinkett. Once all was settled down, Iruka stood at the front, behind his desk. He cleared his throat as he held up a piece of paper. "Here, I have the groups you'll be in now that you've all graduated," he announced, and excited twittering filled the classroom, but it stopped when he glared at them. "You'll all be in 3-man cells, with a Junin-sensei in charge, so be quiet and listen." Quote. He read from the paper. Team 1. The names went on for a while, and Naru saw some people drooping in disappointment as they were not put with their friends, while some beamed at the opposite happening. Team 7 will be Sasuke Uchiha, Sakura Haruno, in your face Ino pig, yelled Sakura, and Naru Uzumaki. Loud protests went up at this, all of them coming from the two female members of the team. "Why is she with us?" Sakura shrieked. "Why am I with those two?" Naru said, staring at Iruka-sensei in what a way that could only be described as dramatic betrayal. Both stared at Iruka-sensei, waiting for an answer. "Well, Sakura-chan, you are," Iruka began, but he was rudely interrupted by the girl whose name he had just spoken. "She'll try and steal Sasuke-kun," she wailed the accusation. Naru's face scrunched up in revulsion. "As if, I don't want that tem. Naru, language," Iruka scolded, but it went unheard. "You can have him for all I care." Quote. "Shut up," Iruka yelled as Sakura opened her mouth to retort. Both girls promptly closed their mouths, wide eyes staring at their sensei. "Now, as I was saying," he said calmly, "Sakura, you are very intelligent, with the highest scores in the class. Sasuke is very talented in ninjutsu and dojutsu, while Naru is the lowest of the class, so it balances it all out." The glare he got for saying that was quite scary. "Now, your sensei will be Kakashi Hatake." Oh, those three were doomed. Pushing that to the back of his mind, he went back to reading out names. Team 8 will be Hinata Hyuga, Hiba Inuzuka and Shino Aburame. Your sensei will be Kurenai Yuhi. Quote. Hiba turned to beam at Hinata, who blushed brightly at the attention. Shino did not move an inch at this information. No protests that time. Team 10 will be Ino Yamanaka, Choji Amikichi and Shikamaru Nara. Your sensei will be Asuma Sarutobi. Quote. Another Sarutobi, Naru thought, raising an eyebrow. Was this man the dad of her apprentice? I'm with Fatso and lazy. Ino said, standing up, her eyes wide with horror, and her jaw was hanging. Naru saw Choji visibly tense at the use of the name Fatso. Sakura burst out laughing at her rival's predicament. She had Sasuke-kun and Ino had those too. Iruka sighed. Ino, your teams are set, there will be no changing, do you understand? Quote. Ino fell back into her seat, apparently too horrified to say anything for once in her life. Now, your senseis should be here soon, so behave. With that warning, he left the room and closed the door behind him. Chatter quickly filled the room. Hokage's office. Junins filled the space of the office, all leaning over and peering into the crystal ball that rested on a cushion on the large oak desk. Sarutobi sat behind the said desk, his eyes focused on one particular girl in the ball, one who did not seem at all happy with the decision of Team 7. He was beginning to doubt Iruka's intentions too, since he had witnessed the rather explosive relationship Naru had with both of her new teammates, but still, he trusted Iruka's judgment. He looked up at his ninjas. What do you think of your team, Kakashi-kun? He asked. Kakashi Hatake looked up from his orange book, the one he was well known for reading, and stared single-eyed at his leader. Do I have to answer? He asked, disinterest and bored as clear as day in his voice. A narrowed look from Sarutobi answered that question. With a great sigh, he answered. Don't really know them, Hokage-sama. That was a lie, he knew one of them very well, as he had taken it upon himself to keep an eye on one of his now students. Sarutobi nodded at the fair answer, although he also knew it was a lie. What about Uzumaki? Asuma Sarutobi questioned, an unlit death stick hanging from his lips. Next to him, the stunning Kurenai Yuhi looked expectantly at her fellow Junin, who was only a few years older than her, but had been a Junin for much, much longer. Kakashi's dark eye drifted lazily over to his friend. What about her? Quote. Are you sure you want someone like her on your team? Asuma did not fully share his father's views on Naru Uzumaki. I only care about what they're capable of, Kakashi said, and returned to his book, effectively blocking everything else out. Sarutobi smiled in amusement. Right, all of you need to get to your teams, he said, and with a nod, everyone left the room, except for Kakashi, who, when the door shut, he lifted his head and closed his book. Why did you give me the Uchiha? Quote. Sarutobi held his hands up. It wasn't my choice, Kakashi-kun, he said gently. The council wanted you to teach him because you were the only other person in the village to have the Sharingan. Quote. Kakashi was displeased. I don't have the time to put up with brooding brat, he said, but heaved a great sigh. Decisions made now. Quote. Don't be late, Kakashi. Quote. This, of course, went completely over Spiky, gravity-defying silvery gray hair as Kakashi reopened his book and left through the door. Sarutobi leaned back in his seat and stared into the crystal ball. Now all there was to do was sit and wait to see how this all played out. Soon enough, like Iruka-sensei said, the senseis arrived to take their eager students away, until only one team was left in the classroom, that team being Team 7. Naru had moved down a few tables, but she still sat at least 7 feet away from her two new teammates, who were sat together, unwilling on Sasuke's side, though. Naru was already fidgeting around, unused to being so still. She looked around the classroom in an attempt to relieve her boredom, when her eyes did a retake on an object, or objects, as she stared at the bottles of paint again. Iruka-sensei had left paint in the classroom. If she could just find some balloons, and she had tripwire with her, this could work. Sasuke and Sakura watched, with concealed curiosity, as their new teammate rushed around the classroom like crazy as if looking for something. It was only a few seconds later that she let out a triumphant cry and held a bag of something up. That something was soon being opened, and small, rubbery-like bags were being taken out, and filled with the paint left in the front desk. Naru, what are you doing? Sakura hissed, rising to her feet to adopt the hands on her hips pose, a furious look on her face. Quite the opposite to her outer self, her inner Sakura was yelling encouragement and swinging her fist around excitedly. Come on. The sensei deserves this. Quote. Sasuke snorted and looked away, muttering, stupid pranks by weak girls. Although, he did keep glancing at Naru out of the corner of his eye. Naru grinned mischievously as she set up her harmless, but funny, prank and then went and stood near Sasuke and Sakura to enjoy the result of her work. The other two also turned to watch the door, each one ready to make a judgment on their sensei, depending on how he passed her prank. The moment arrived when footsteps began a slow, steady trek down the corridor towards the door, echoing closer each second, until finally, the door slid open. It triggered the trip wire, and the balloons full of paint came flying from the other side of the room. The man that stood there raised a single onyx eye, and tilted a head covered with spiky, gravity-defying silvery gray hair, though he was not old. The paintballs hit the wall and door around him, not a single one hitting him, and then, to finish it off, a blackboard eraser fell on top of his spiky hair, producing a white cloud. He blinked, unimpressed. Sasuke hid a scowl. His sensei was someone who couldn't avoid that Baka's pranks. What hope did he have to learn anything off a man like that? Inner Sakura pumped her fist into the black space of the mind, while outer Sakura scowled at Naru. My first impression of you, the man said casually, is that I hate you. Meet me up on the roof. He gave Naru one last, unimpressed look, before he turned and walked from the room. Sakura whirled on the young blonde. Look what you've gone and done now. Our sensei hates us and he hasn't even known us for 10 seconds. She raged. Naru shrugged. He'll get over it, she said easily, and then she followed in the direction that their sensei had gone off in. She knew the way to the rooftop like the back of her hand since she'd spent so much time up there. She heard the other two follow. By the time they got there, the strange man was sitting on the railing, looking as if he'd been waiting for them for hours. His orange book, the one Naru had seen in the bandana idiot's house, was still present and he still appeared to be reading it. It was a tight squeeze onto the bench, with Sakura in the middle. Naru was more than willing to give up that spot to her. She would rather sit on the floor than sit in between a fangirl and someone who always had a dark cloud hanging over his head. This team would have issues for definite. Right, introduce yourself. Your likes, your dislikes, your dreams. The man said without looking up from his book. Sakura bit her lip, looking bewildered. Can you give us an example, sensei? She asked hesitantly. The man looked at her as if she'd just asked him to run 50 miles, and as he began to talk, the simple task looked too much for him. Me, I'm Kakashi Hatake. I have no intention of telling you my likes and dislikes. As for my dream, never really thought of any. I have few hobbies. Quote. That was the most unhelpful answer that Naru had ever received. Judging by Sasuke and Sakura's looks, it was for them too. They stared blankly at him. Right, Pinky, your turn. Kakashi-sensei said cheerfully, his single eye turning upwards in a U shape. Sakura swelled up in indignation, her emerald eyes flashing. My name is Haruno Sakura. The thing I like is... Well, she looked at Sasuke and blushed heavily. And my dream for the future is... At this, she looked at Sasuke again. My hobby is... What I dislike is Naru. Quote. Naru stuck her tongue out. Well, I don't like you much either, she said flippantly. Brooder. Quote. Sasuke glared. Before he began his dramatic words, the air around him becoming heavy with a theater-like feeling. My name is Sasuke Uchiha. There are many things I dislike, and not much I do like. And I have an ambition that I have no plan to leave as a dream. The restoration of my clan, and to kill a certain man. Quote. Well, if that wasn't dramatic, then Naru wasn't sure what was. Blondie, Kakashi said, turning the page of his book. Naru grinned. I'm Naru Uzumaki. What I like is ramen, especially the kind at the Ichiraku ramen shop. What I dislike is the 3-minute wait after you pour in the boiling water. My hobbies are eating ramen. And my dream is to be the next Hokage. That didn't sound right to her. She liked so much more than ramen. She disliked a lot. She had lots of hobbies, and she had another dream, though she couldn't quite remember what it was. Ha! Sakura scoffed, as if you could ever become Hokage. Baka. This earned her a nasty glare from the blonde, and she recoiled slightly. Ha. Naru mimicked her, as if you could ever fulfill your dream. She might have not been the most observant person, but it didn't take a genius to figure out what Sakura's dream for the future was, especially because she looked at the Uchiha when saying it, and coupled with the fact that the Tem had mentioned restoring his clan, the stars in her eyes told all. This resulted in a glaring match. Now, children, Kakashi said, let's not kill each other on our first day. Hokage-sama wouldn't be too pleased with me. Not to mention the awful paperwork he would have to fill out. Right, now our introductions are out of the way, I'll tell you this, we have our first mission tomorrow. Quote. Naru looked away from Sakura with bright eyes. Really? So soon? She asked happily. What is it? She leaned forward in eagerness and excitement. A survival exercise, their sensei said vaguely. Survival exercise, Sakura piped up, but I thought we were supposed to go on real missions now that we're genins. We've done all this in the academy. Quote. Naru waved the pinkett off. Shish, she said, and turned her attention to the strange man. So what sort of thing are we doing? Quote. This caused a strange, creepy laugh to escape Kakashi. His new students blinked at him. You won't like what I'm going to tell you, you know, he said, are you sure you want to know? Quote. They stared at him. Fine, he muttered. Out of the 28 of you, only 9 will actually pass and become genin. In other words, the weak will be weeded out and sent back to the academy. He enjoyed their shocked faces, and decided to add to his own humor. And, there is a 66% chance that you'll fail. He ended it with his signature eye-curved smile. The deadpan looks he received were photo-worthy. Then the protests arose. What do you mean? Naru said loudly, we're genin already, aren't we? Quote. Nope, Kakashi said brightly as he stood up. Meet me at training ground 3 tomorrow morning, 7 am, and don't eat anything or you'll just throw it back up. With a jaunty wave, he stood up and leapt off the side of the building. Naru stood up. Well, I'm off for some ramen, she said, her stomach rumbling in agreement. Sakura turned starry eyes to Sasuke. Do you want to go and get something to eat, Sasuke-kun? She simpered, batting pink eyelashes. Sasuke, by now, had stood up and was walking towards the door that led back into the building. His silence was an obvious no, but this did not affect Sakura, for she chased after him, calling his name. Naru sighed as she followed, but at a slower pace. Why was she stuck with those two again? The next morning the loud beeping of an alarm clock dragged a reluctant Naru into consciousness. She glared at the offending piece of machinery and abruptly grabbed it and launched it at the wall with a satisfying smashing sound, and she watched as it fell to the floor in pieces. She sighed. 4th alarm clock this month. Ji-san really wasn't going to be happy with her. She threw off the covers and climbed out of bed and padded, or more like stumbled sleepily, into the bathroom and closed the door. Half an hour later, after a nice hot shower and doing everything else one does in a bathroom, she pulled on her usual jumpsuit, reminding herself that this was the only thing she could afford. She smiled into the mirror, and twirled around to make sure she looked fine, before she got to work on her hair. She decided on a high ponytail, and then she tied the high tape around her head, the metal plate resting over her forehead. There, all done, she said happily. Another dilemma appeared when she walked into the kitchen. Her new sensei had told her not to eat anything for breakfast or else she would be sick later on, but she had learned never to do something on an empty stomach or else you'd feel like crap, and on the other hand, she wasn't exactly known for following the rules, so what could some toast hurt? So she walked towards training ground 3, munching away on some buttery toast, and thinking about what today had in store. When she reached the training ground, she saw Sasuke leaning against one of the 3 wooden posts on the training ground, and Sakura fawning over the Uchiha, who was still ignoring the pinkett. She sighed. For such a smart girl, Sakura sure was stupid. She walked over to a shaded tree and sat underneath, choosing to take a page from Shikamaru's book and stare up at the sky as a pastime. Ah, peace and quiet. Sasuke-kun, after Kakashi-sensei's test, do you want to go on a date? Asked Sakura, staring at her crush dreamily. No, said Sasuke coolly. This carried on for quite a while, and Naru reluctantly had to give the tem credit. A weaker-minded person would have ran away by now. An hour passed, and their sensei still hadn't shown up. Tempers were running a bit high now. Sakura was becoming twitchy, her emerald orbs shooting around in irritation, and she was running her fingers through the hair she obviously hadn't had time to wash this morning. Naru was shifting restlessly, pacing the bridge like a caged animal, and she was considering going and hunting the tardy sensei down, if only she knew where he lived. Sasuke, though he tried to hide it, was becoming irritated. After another 2 hours, which were filled with insults being passed between the two females of the group, and Sasuke making snide comments under his breath, that Sakura finally looked ready to crack. "Where is he?" she screamed, pulling at her hair, and she let out another scream when she saw that she'd pulled out a few strands. "We've been here for 3 hours. And there's been no sign of him." Quote. "Really?" Naru asked sarcastically, "like we haven't noticed." Quote. Sakura whirled on her teammate, an insult rising in her throat. "Don't you dare talk to me like that, you baka." Quote. Unlike other times, when it was difficult to get her so angry, rage sparked in her and Naru looked up at the older girl. "I can talk to you however I want, Pinky." She snapped back, crossing her arms over her chest. Sasuke rolled his eyes as the two of them stared each other down. He was stuck with two weaklings who didn't know how to shut up. The staring competition continued. Then, happening so suddenly, a shadow, or something, passed through Naru's eyes, as if a dull red light had been shined from behind her blue orbs. It terrified Sakura enough to have her rearing back, which confused the small blonde. "Sakura?" she asked. Sakura shook her head. "What?" she snapped angrily, and turned away to walk over to Sasuke. Maybe it had been a trick of the light. Sasuke stared suspiciously at the smallest member of Team 7. He had noticed Sakura's reaction, as if she were scared of something, of Naru, which didn't make sense. The Dobi wasn't scary, nor had his fangirl ever been scared of her. Naru stared after Sakura. She had a bad feeling about what had happened, and she just knew it had something to do with the other night, the burning rage that had been created by the fire in her stomach. The thing that worried her the most, though, was that the rage wasn't hers. "Getting along," a voice said pleasantly, and all three turned their heads to see Kakashi standing by the big marble memorial stone, book in hand. Sakura stormed towards him. "Where the hell have you been?" She raged at him. "Me and Sasuke-kun have been here for 3 hours." Quote. Kakashi raised his visible eyebrow. "Just the two of you, he said, and turned to Naru. She shrugged. "I got here at 7. Just like you misinformed me too," she said sweetly, though she was glaring at him. "You were supposed to be here when we were, sensei." Sakura screamed again, her fists shaking at her sides. Kakashi raised his free hand in surrender. "I have a very good reason for that," he said cheerfully. "Yes." Quote. "I got lost on the path of life." He said it so seriously that it would have been difficult not to believe him, if it weren't for how outrageous and stupid it sounded. "That is the worst excuse I've ever heard," Sakura said, crossing her arms over her chest. Doubtful looks went around, even one from Sasuke, who had nothing but the brooding look in his emotional range. Kakashi reached into his pocket, rummaged around in it for a few seconds, and withdrew his hand again, this time holding something. He opened his hand and allowed 2 bells, attached to a red string that was hooked over his finger, to dangle. "Now that I'm here, shall we get to it?" he asked cheerfully. "Your test is to get these 2 bells from me. If you do, you pass." Quote. Sakura frowned, seeing a problem with her sensei's apparently smart, and well thought of, training exercise, or survival exercise, as he had called it. "Demo, sensei," she said reluctantly, drawing his attention to her. "There's only 2 bells, and there's 3 of us." Quote. Naru had to refrain from saying a sarcastic comment about pointing out the obvious, but she did stop herself, because she saw that problem too. Sasuke stared sharply at the sensei, suspicion in his eyes again. Kakashi chuckled evilly. "Exactly. When one of you fails to obtain a bell, you'll automatically be sent back to the academy while the other 2 will pass," he said. "The one who loses will be tied to this post, while the 2 who pass will get to eat." He set 2 bentos down in front of the memorial stone, putting an alarm clock in between them. "You must come at me with the intent to kill." He received shocked looks at this, but he simply smiled. You have an hour, get going. He pressed the button on top of the alarm clock. The three genins disappeared to find hiding places. Kakashi raised a slightly impressive eyebrow. Their disappearing was better than he had expected, but he could still sense them. All he had to do now was wait and see what they could do. He would have to be careful with Naru and Sasuke. While Naru wasn't incredibly talented, she did have the Mokuton, and he knew she'd been training in wood techniques. She might have been told not to reveal her bloodline, but bloodlines appeared accidentally and unexpectedly. And Sasuke, he was very talented, according to his academy records in both smarts and jutsus. Sakura, if she worked with the other two, which he severely doubted she would, well, with Naru anyway, they could actually pull this off. But he would probably be disappointed in the long run. He didn't have a long record of failing teams for no reason. They never did the one thing he looked for in a team. Sighing, he turned his eye back to his book and let out a perverted giggle. From her place in a bush, Naru stared at the sensei with a big frown. Was he really just standing there, reading that dirty book of his? That was insulting. Well, she would show him not to underestimate her. She formed the seal she had learned not too long ago, while doing that illegal thing, and whispered, Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. She'd been practicing this jutsu while training with the Mokuton. Numerous clones popped into existence, all crouched down next to her, all identical to her. Let's go, she whispered, and she watched as two of her clones left the bush in separate directions, obviously knowing what her plan was. One clone waited a bit of a distance behind Kakashi, and the other appeared in front of him, standing there casually, as the original Naru would. Kakashi-sensei, she said. Kakashi looked up, a bit boredly. He raised an eyebrow. Was she really going to confront him? This is a bit bold, Naru-chan, he said calmly, not bothering to put his book away. He could deal with her one-handedly. She grinned. Have you seen the clothes I'm wearing? She joked. If that's not bold. She did have a point. The clothes would have to change. Bright orange, and being a ninja, did not match. He stared at her. There was a reason that she, normally such a brash and impulsive person, was not attacking. She was up to something. That was confirmed when he felt something reaching into his back pocket. He whirled around and saw another Naru leaning forward, obviously having been attempting to pickpocket him, and he delivered a swift blow to her stomach. His hand connected with something solid, but that couldn't have been real, because Naru disappeared in a poof of smoke. So, that was the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu Hokage-sama had told him about. She really did learn it, then. He turned back to the other Naru, and found her pouting. He raised an eyebrow. You're not the real one, are you? Her devious smile answered him. Then he was attacked on all sides by numerous Narus, all of whom were shouting as they did. It didn't take him long to dispose of the clones. With a swift hit, each clone vanished in a poof of smoke till there was none left. Impressive, Naru-chan, he said, seeing a flash of orange as his smallest student moved from her place in a bush not too far away. With a small smile hidden beneath his mask, he followed her. Naru let out a small squeak as she was grabbed from behind. She looked up and saw her sensei. Hey, put me down, she shouted, trying to kick him. He simply chuckled and threw her into the river with a loud splash. She was submerged by the clear liquid. Kakashi walked away, whistling a jaunty tune. Now time for the other two. Somewhere else, Sasuke snorted from where he was hiding. The Dobi shouldn't have even bothered trying. Surely it was his turn now. He would show everyone how it was done and take a bell. He emerged from his hiding place, but he stopped dead when a yell went up. Sakura giggled to herself. She had such a good hiding place. She couldn't be seen, and at the same time, she could see everyone else. At least 30 Narus launched out of the river, all of them intent on attacking Kakashi, and he whirled around, just in time to be jumped on. He sighed. The clone trick again. Judging by her fierceness, he had annoyed her. He put his book away, so not to damage it, and he got to work on dispelling all the clones. Punches and kicks were thrown at him, and he gave them out in order to get rid of the annoyances. Naru didn't have a set fighting skill, just one you would expect to find from people who had been brawling on the street. Given her past, it wasn't unlikely. Still, She lashed out impressively. It didn't take long for him to send her flying back into the river, and this time, she did not come flying out. She stood up in the water and hit at it like a child and pouted. He waved and walked off. She had determination, he'd give her that. Now for Sakura. He found her hiding underneath a bush, and with an evil smile, he formed the right seals for a genjutsu he liked to use. While that was happening, Naru had pulled herself out of the river and sat on the edge of it, trying to think of a new plan. How could she fool a Junin? This was one of those times when she wished she would have stayed in the academy and learned a bit more. Still, she had the mind of a prankster, maybe she could put that to use. She could fool Anbu sometimes, so why not a Junin? Oh, how she wanted to use the Mokuton. It would make things so much easier. Stupid Ji-san and his stupid rules. And she was hungry. With Sakura, however, things weren't really going as well. Sakura. Sasuke's voice stammered, and she spun around, a grin lighting her face. He had come to work with her. He was on the floor, panting heavily, dark blood coming from wounds that were all over his body. She shrieked and ran over to him. Sasuke, she screamed, dropping to her knees next to him. Who had done such a thing? Sasuke-kun, speak to me, don't die, Sasuke-kun, quote. Kakashi watched her, blinking. Maybe I overdid it, he murmured to himself, and then he shrugged. She'd get over it, she had to learn somehow. Now for the next little one. Sasuke looked around, his dark eyes searching for his sensei. Where was that man? I know you're here, quote. So impatient, Kakashi said from behind him, and Sasuke turned around to see the man strolling casually towards him. Come to face me like Naru-chan did. Speaking of her, a quick glance at the river told him that she was no longer there. Definitely determined. Sasuke frowned. I'm not as weak as she is, he seethed, and to prove it, he formed hand seals that no normal 12-year-old should have known. Fire release. Great fireball technique. He drew in a deep breath, and exhaled, but breath did not come out. Instead, a long stream of fire spewed forth, flying towards Kakashi at incredible speed. Kakashi's eye widened briefly. Sasuke knew that technique. He was powerful. The flames engulfed him in a huge, fiery ball. When it died down, Sasuke expected to see a badly burnt Kakashi, but to his great surprise, the man was nowhere in sight. He looked around. Below, a voice said, just as a hand grasped his ankle, and yanked him down into the ground so that only his head remained above. Kakashi smiled down at him. Ninjas are very tricky. Sasuke-kun, he said cheerfully, you have talent, and you are different from the other two, but that isn't always better. Each person has their own skill. Take the blonde for example, she may not be a fantastic ninja, nor does she know a lot of academy stuff, but she uses different skills in her own way that allow her to always get out of tricky spots, and actually put up a fight. Quote. Hearing praise on another person was not what Sasuke wanted to hear, especially the dead last, because his face formed an impressive scowl. She's just a doby who gets lucky, he muttered, she's weak. Quote. Kakashi shrugged. Depends on your definition of weak, he said, and then walked away. Leave the brooder to get out of the ground. Now to find his tricky student. He knew that Sakura would still be in the genjutsu, unless she had enough sense to break it, though her crush on the Uchiha did seem to blind her to anything else. He did find Naru, but not where he expected to. He was a little disappointed. She was sitting at the memorial stone, with one of the two bentos on her lap, and preparing to eat. Caught you, he said darkly. Naru froze, looked up, and cringed. Meanwhile, Sakura had broken out of the genjutsu and was running in search of her precious teammate. It just so happened that she ran straight by the place where Sasuke had been pulled underground, and she froze in pure shock at only seeing his head. Sakura stared blankly at her. Sakura, was she going to stand there all day and stare at him? It was annoying. Sakura let out a loud scream that sent surrounding birds flying away. Sasuke-kun's just a head without a body. And he's still talking. She let out one last scream before fainting. That is my partner, Sasuke said in disbelief. How did he, the strongest student, manage to get stuck with two people who were defeated so quickly? Shaking his head, he reminded himself that he had to get himself out of here and get a bell, unless he wanted to get sent back to the academy. He would get a bell this time, after he woke Sakura up, he supposed. This is what you get for trying to eat, Kakashi said, reading his book as Naru struggled against the bonds that held her to the middle wooden post. And I've heard about your escape acts, it won't work with those ropes. Quote. Naru attempted to untie them, but found out the sensei was right. He had put the knot right at the front, where she could see it, but not reach it. It was then that the alarm went off. Kakashi chuckled. Time to round up the troops. Quote. Minutes later, Sakura and Sasuke were sitting on either side of their teammate, who was sulking. They both wondered how she had gotten there, and why, but they chose not to ask. Well, you've all failed, he said calmly, as if he had just told them that it was sunny, and not that they were getting sent back to the academy. Nani, Naru shrieked, you can't just do that. You can't send us back. You said 2 of us could get the bells. No one's got one yet. She struggled against her bonds, but she found them to be very restricting. Kakashi sighed. You're all failing because you don't think like ninja, he said, you don't think like you should. You're not little kids anymore, not in the world of ninja. It's time to stop thinking like one. Quote. Sasuke growled low in his throat. Who was Kakashi calling a kid? He was a ninja. He had been raised to be one, and he did think like one. He had already proven that with his attacks. No kid could do that. Without a second thought, he rushed forward. Kakashi moved out of the way, grabbed an arm, twisted it and managed to send the Uchiha to the ground. He then promptly sat on the boy's back. Well, you are selfish, he said lightly, you think it's all about you. Quote. Let go of Sasuke-kun. Sakura yelped. No, don't, keep him there, Naru muttered. It was a good look for him, and he needed a little lesson in humiliation. An onyx eye turned to glare at them both, and the two recoiled back. Well, Sakura did, but Naru did look a bit startled at the harshness in the glare. You don't know what it means to be a ninja. You think it's a game. He snapped, becoming annoyed. Why do you think you were put into squads? Did you ever consider that? Quote. I don't know what you mean, Sakura said shakily. Naru tilted her head to the side. She knew this answer. Someone had explained it to her once, but who was it? And what was the answer? It was so simple, apparently too simple for her to remember. I mean, you never figured out what this exercise was all about, Kakashi said, not even close. He was disappointed. He'd had a small, tiny hope that these 3 would be able to do it, but then again, he had been given 3 students who couldn't be more different. That is what determines whether you pass or fail. Quote. He still received blank looks. Why do you think we put you in squads of 3? He tried again. Why do you think we would do that? Sakura was supposed to be the smart one, surely she should have figured it out by now. Then it came to Naru. To get us to work together, right? She supplied, we were supposed to work together. Quote. Kakashi nodded, a little surprised that Naru had been the one to answer. If all 3 of you had come at me at once, you might have been able to take them, he said, before he shrugged. Well, it's too late now. You all fail. Quote. There were shocked noises. But you only have 2 bells. Sakura protested. Even if we had worked together to get them, there still would have only been 2 who passed, thus causing conflict in the group. Quote. It was never about passing, Kakashi said finally, it was always about how you got the bells. Quote. Teamwork, Sakura guessed. Finally, the Junin nodded. He looked down at the boy he was sat on. You, Sasuke, are far too arrogant and proud to admit that you need help, he said, and then turned his attention to the Pinkett. You, Sakura, are so blinded and infatuated with Sasuke that you refused to help Naru, who was struggling. At this, Naru protested, but she was silenced when he turned to her. And you, Naru, you always do things on your own, unwilling to let anyone help you. Quote. At the end, the 3 of them all refrained from dropping their heads down like scolded children. Kakashi sighed. Okay, how about this scenario? He said, casually approaching Naru, and suddenly, he whipped out a kunai and held it to the girl's throat. She squeaked, while Sasuke, who'd jumped to his feet, and Sakura looked shocked. Sensei, Sakura stammered. Sakura, kill Sasuke, or I kill Naru. Quote. Naru jerked back, or as far as the post allowed her to. Surely Ji-san wouldn't let him do this, right? Wasn't the Hokage supposed to be against the killing of his own ninjas? Sakura said, eyes wide, and jaw hanging. Kakashi put the kunai back in his pouch. Thought so, he said, before pointing at the two bentos. You may not have passed, but since you two didn't try to eat when you weren't supposed to, you get to eat, while Naru looks on. Don't feed her. He then turned around and walked off. After a minute, to make sure that the crazy sensei was gone, Sakura eagerly reached for a bento, her stomach rumbling in a very loud and unladylike manner. Sasuke also picked up a bento. The two sat down on either side of Naru, opened the trays, broke the chopsticks, and began to eat. Naru groaned and let her head fall back against the post. She was so hungry. It wasn't fair. I'm so hungry, she said pathetically. She risked a look at the other two, who were now eating away happily, ignorant of her pain. Sakura hesitated as she brought another chopstick full up to her mouth, and she looked over at Naru. She didn't want to do this, but she felt really bad after what Kakashi had said. She lowered her chopsticks, placing them neatly in the tray, and picked up a rice ball. She stood up and approached Naru. Here, she said, holding it out. Naru gave her a doubtful, and slightly mistrustful look. Really? She asked, a bit hopeful. Eat the damn food, Dobi, Sasuke said. She sent him an annoyed look, but opened her mouth to accept the food. Sakura popped it in and she happily chewed. Hurry, or we'll get into trouble with Kakashi. Quote. Too late, a dark voice said, and as if the sun had been stolen, the world turned dark and thunder crashed overhead. Sakura let out a small scream and fell onto her ass. Kakashi loomed over them, the lightning crashing behind him, and he looked truly scary. What do you think you're doing? He asked. I told you not to feed her. Quote. Sakura seemed at a loss of words. Naru quickly gulped down her food, coughing a bit. Sasuke stared coldly at the man. We weren't going to let her go hungry, he said reluctantly. Suddenly, Kakashi's eye curved upwards, and the world became sunny and nice again. You pass, he said cheerfully. Birds tweeted innocently in the background. What? Sakura screamed, jumping to her feet. What do you mean we passed? Quote. You helped her out and feed her when I told you not to, he said, holding up a finger on the hand that didn't hold the book. In the ninja world, those who break the rules are scum, that's true, but those who abandon their friends are worse than scum. For a moment, the three of them thought they could hear pride in his voice, and see it in his eye, but it was gone in a second. Welcome to Team 7, quote. Naru beamed happily, while Sakura began jumping up and down in joy. Even Sasuke allowed a smirk to come to his face. Let's all go for ramen to celebrate, Kakashi announced, turning around, and he walked off. Sasuke and Sakura stood up and followed their new sensei. Naru's cheerful mood evaporated. Wait, hey, you forgot to untie me, she yelled, struggling against the tight rope. Ramen was her favorite. She swore Kakashi did it on purpose. After a bit more struggling, she felt a warmth in her stomach, and the ropes fell to the floor. She grinned and ran off to catch up with her new team. She could still escape easily. Behind her, the ropes lay on the floor, a strange crimson fire burning through the thick material. The next 3 weeks were filled with minuscule missions, ones that Kakashi-sensei said, build up teamwork, but Naru considered the thought that he was purposely torturing them. They'd been tasked with painting a fence for an old lady, though the said fence was about 100 feet long, so Naru turned it into a paint war. Babysitting little children for a couple who'd gone out for the day, leaving behind their demon triplets. Delivering food to the Amikichi clan house. Bathing the Inuzuka dogs, but Team 7 were kept an eye on because Naru had once pulled a prank on the Inuzuka property. Walking numerous dogs, with Naru demanding that she take the leashes of the big dogs, only to regret it when they ended up dragging her through bushes. Fishing was also a mission, which Naru quite enjoyed because she got to stand at the top of a waterfall. Still, the missions lost their fun after the second day of the silly tasks. For the 3rd week running, Team 7 received the one mission that all ninjas feared doing, the Tora mission. Tora was the demon in the form of a cat that belonged to the daimyo's wife. She was notorious for escaping and evading all attempts at capture, even from the most skilled of ninja. She must run away at least 5 times a week, sometimes just after she was caught and taken back to her own. Team 7 agreed on one thing for the first time ever: the cat was better left alone. Leave it to the wild. Tora's personality was that of a feral cat, anyway. It was a Thursday afternoon. The sun was shining brightly through fluffy white clouds, from in amongst a sea of clear blue. "Sakura, it's coming your way," Sasuke said through the earpiece, watching from his place in a tree as Tora the cat toddled innocently through the forest. "Are you sure it's Tora?" Sakura's voice came back. "There's a red ribbon," Sasuke confirmed. Naru's voice crackled over the earpiece. "It's in my sight, but it's closer to Sakura, so she can handle this," she said happily, leaning against the tree she'd climbed into a few minutes previously. "Use your code names," Kakashi's shamelessly cheerful voice chirped over the earpieces. There was silence on all ends. Then, reluctantly, Sakura's voice came. "Pinky here, Tora is closing in on my position." Quote. A giggle told them that Naru was finding it amusing. "Shut up, fox face." Sakura raged, but she only received another laugh. "Brooder here, shut up, or you'll scare the cat away," Sasuke said. "Sorry Brooder," Naru said in an unapologetic voice. "Fox face is better though, it sounds cool." Quote. "Tora is heading in your direction, nah fox face," Sakura said suddenly. Naru looked down from her perch in the tree. The demon cat was indeed passing by her tree. "I'm on it," she whispered, and pushed away from the tree trunk. As soon as Tora had walked underneath the tree, she dropped from the branch into the floor, intent on grabbing the cat. She missed by an inch. She had felt the fur before Tora launched herself in another direction. "Damn it, it got away," she said. "Kakashi-sensei, it's heading your way, I think." Quote. "This isn't my job, fox face," Kakashi said brightly. "You catch the cat." Scarecrow out. Quote. Naru huffed. What happened to this being teamwork, huh? You were the sensei. She didn't expect an answer back from him, which was good, because she didn't get one. Sasuke dropped from his tree and approached where Naru was standing. "It'll be better if we search for it on ground," he said, assuming the position of leader, as he had been since they'd become Team 7. Neither girl really cared. Well, Naru did, because the Tem was too smug and arrogant, but as long as he didn't overstep his bounds, then she was fine with him sometimes taking the lead. It saved her the hard work. Naru nodded. "Dropping from a tree takes too much time," she muttered, reluctantly agreeing with her rival. It was then that Sakura joined their little meeting, having decided that Naru was spending too much alone time with Sasuke. They set off after Tora. 10 minutes later, Team 7 emerged from the woods. Kakashi was reading his book. Naru was nursing a scratch on her cheek, and Sasuke had a few cuts on his arms and legs. Sakura was happily cooing over Tora, who was sitting snugly in her arms. "That cat should be put down," Naru said, glaring darkly at the ginger ball of evil. "It will be the humane thing to do." Quote. "How is it humane to put a perfectly healthy cat down?" Sakura asked. "I didn't mean humane for the cat, I meant for us humans," Naru corrected. "Seriously, I swear I've heard of people who were like 15 years older than us catching that cat back when they were genins." Quote. "That's not possible," Sakura protested. "Normal cats don't live for that long." Quote. "Well, that cat isn't normal, is it?" Naru said. "That cat is the devil reborn into a small form, sent to torture us." Quote. Sakura turned to their sensei, hoping to get his information on this and to prove Naru wrong. "Kakashi-sensei, Tora wasn't around when you were young, was she?" Quote. Kakashi didn't answer, too lost in the memories of him and his former team spending hours trying to catch Tora many years ago. The devil in cat form indeed. They soon reached the Hokage's tower, where an eager daimyo's wife was waiting in the mission room, looking worried for her little smoochums, as she liked to call the cat. As soon as the door opened, and Team 7 walked in, she nearly deafened everyone with her happy shriek. "Oh, my baby Tora," she crowed, "come to mummy." She held out fat arms to receive her baby, who began to struggle in Sakura's arms as the pinkett handed the ginger mass over. Sarutobi and Iruka were sitting behind a long desk, with the academy teacher going through missions to be taken. The Hokage smiled warmly. Well, let's see what we have next, he said, holding out his hand, and Iruka placed a scroll of D-rank missions in the old, wrinkled hand, which he began to scan through. Next, you have many choices: painting more fences, walking more dogs, feeding the Inuzuka dogs. He was cut off by a loud scream of, "No! Tora, come back!" from the daimyo's wife. Are catching Tora again. Quote. Naruto had enough. She refused, crossing her arms over her chest in a show of stubbornness. I refuse to do any more of these missions. They're not missions. They're chores that people are too lazy to do. That old, batty woman wants the fences repainted every single day. She should stick with brown. The Inuzukas have had dogs for how long? It's their dogs, they can do it. And that cat is an abomination who should be put down to put us out of our misery. By the end of this, she was breathing heavily and glaring angrily. Give us something better to do. Quote. Sakura huffed. Naru, don't speak to Hokage-sama like that. She snapped, but she was ignored. Sarutobi blinked. You really feel very strongly about this, he mused. Iruka, however, was not as calm as the Hokage. Naru, you can't speak to the Hokage like that. Missions are given ranks for a reason, and genins are given those ranks for a reason. He continued on with his lecture, but, by now, Team 7 had ventured off into their own little worlds, each thinking of something else. I wonder if Sasuke'll accept my offer of a date, Sakura thought, giving a little giggle. I could be somewhere much more interesting than this, like training to kill him. Sasuke thought darkly, glaring at the floor as if it had wronged him in some way. What to have for dinner? I still have ramen in the cupboards at home. Then again, I've been doing so well that Iruka-sensei might be sympathetic and take me out for some ramen, and get me some pocky on the way back. I do like pocky. Naru thought, looking thoughtful as she stared at the ceiling. Kakashi chuckled slightly. Naru, Iruka yelled, bringing everyone back to their senses. Since it was usually Naru who ignored him, and who he had been mainly speaking to, he was going to blame her. 3 weeks with the other two, and she'd turned them into people who ignore him. It was bound to happen. Naru raised an eyebrow, a defiant look still gracing her features. She was going to win this argument. Look, sensei, she began seriously, shocking everyone in the room, even the random Junin who had come in to get a new mission. I get what you're saying, I do, but what I'm saying is that we're ready for a higher level mission. And frankly, sensei, I am quite insulted that you tried to argue against me, because that would be indicating that you think I'm too weak to go on a higher mission. The puppy eyes. Now, she definitely deserved credit there, thought an impressed Kakashi, who had even looked up from his book at that point. Maybe she would one day be Hokage with those skills at talking. Sakura blinked. Had Naru just said something very smart, while imploring to Iruka-sensei's soft spot for her? Sasuke's face did not chance, though on the inside, he was a bit shocked. Iruka's eyes were wide. He was torn between scolding his former student at talking back to him, and then comforting Naru-chan and assuring her that he didn't think she was weak. Damn girl was tricky. Sarutobi chuckled slightly. Hokage-sama, I agree with Naru, Sasuke said, struggling to say his teammate's name instead of the normal Dobi. Sakura now seemed to agree with Naru, because she looked very accepting. If Sasuke-kun thinks we should do it, she said, nodding her head strongly. The fangirl crush was helpful, then. For once, the three were agreeing on something. They were working together to disobey their superiors. To disobey the Hokage. Kakashi couldn't have been more proud. His ducklings were growing up. Seeing that the three genins were not going to give up, and that Kakashi wasn't doing anything to stop them, the Hokage gave up. Very well, he said in defeat. Demo, Hokage-sama. Iruka immediately protested, but he quickly gave up when he heard Naru's cough, and he was reminded of her little speech. She smiled triumphantly. Sarutobi raised a hand. It's okay, Iruka-san, he said calmly, if they think they're ready for a higher level mission, then I say we agree. Right, Kakashi-kun, quote. Kakashi glanced up from his book. Hi, he answered shortly, and went back to his book, letting out a perverted giggle. Naru grinned. Oh good, I was thinking that I would have had to convince the team to fail every single mission you would have given us, had you refused me, she said, grinning widely. Everyone just gaped at her. Oh yes, she was good. Well, we have an escort mission. AC rank, Sarutobi said, opening the scroll that Iruka had just passed to him. Oh, really? Naru asked excitedly, is it someone important? Like a lord, or a lady, or a prince? Come on, tell me, quote. Sarutobi smiled, taking a chance to get his own back. The bridge builder, Tizuna, he announced. The door slid open and a man in his late 50s stumbled in, his hair and beard gray and scraggly, his eyes bloodshot and unfocused, and he was swaying uneasily, but still managed to keep a tight grip on his sake bottle. A bridge builder. That's a bridge builder, Naru asked doubtfully. He's drunk. Golden eyebrows furrowed. Sakura frowned as well, wrinkling her nose at the state he was in. Sasuke appeared impassive. Tizuna turned bloodshot eyes to her. This is who is supposed to be protecting me. He slurred. Two snot-nosed kids and a brat. Quote. It took Naru a few moments to realize that it was her he was calling a brat. It took only a second to launch herself at the bridge builder, yelling profanities at him. A hand just managed to grab the back of her collar, effectively stopping her in her tracks, with her legs still going in a very comical way. Let me go. She looked up to see who had gotten a hold of her, and a flash of orange told her everything. Kakashi-sensei, let me go. Quote. It was the first time that Iruka had ever heard Naru call another person sensei, and though he felt pride at her growth, it also stung a little to know that she was now relying on someone else. Naru, we do not kill the client, it doesn't work that way, he said, as if this were a completely normal thing to be telling your 12-year-old student. If it did, some past missions would have been finished a lot quicker and easier. Naru settled down, but she continued to glare at the man. Kakashi turned to Tizuna. Tizuna-san, I am a Junin, and I can assure you that no harm will come to you, he said reassuringly, but he would have to keep an eye on his smallest student if he wanted to keep that reassurance. Tizuna looked doubtful, but he nodded. I'll meet you at the gate tomorrow morning, 8 am, he said, and then stumbled out of the room. I would have preferred someone like the Tem than him, at least I know how to deal with that sort, Naru said as she looked at Sarutobi, unimpressed. So, what are we doing exactly? Quote, escorting him, duh, Sakura said, rolling her eyes. Sarutobi cleared his throat as the two girls began to glare at each other, and it brought their attention to him. You'll be escorting him back to the Wave Country, and he'll need protecting from just the thieves and bandits that travel around. Quote, well, why would they attack him? He doesn't look like he's got a penny to his name, Naru muttered, probably spent it all on sake. Quote, Naru, don't insult the client, Iruka scolded, but as usual, his former student ignored him. When it looked as if Sakura was going to start asking questions, Kakashi finally decided to interrupt, and he showed an impressive skill of control over them. Come on ducklings, let's leave these two to their jobs, shall we? Quote, Iruka's jaw dropped when he saw Naru sigh, roll her eyes, but willingly give up on the grilling. Even he hadn't had that much control over Naru. Let's go for some food. Naru chirped, and she bounced out of the office. Kakashi and the rest of the team followed after the small blonde. That left Sarutobi and Iruka staring after them. She has you wrapped around her little finger, doesn't she? A voice said lightly, and both turned their heads to see a young man with spiky brown hair, sparkling green eyes and tanned skin. He wore a Junin uniform, with his own little flare of black stripped down his legs. Kyo-kun, Sarutobi asked, how long have you been standing there? Quote, Kyo shrugged, a small smirk playing on his lips. Long enough to know that if that girl wanted every shop to be turned into a ramen store, she'd get it in no time, he said, and with a wink, he left the room. He's right, Iruka said pathetically. Anyone up for barbecue? Kakashi suddenly asked from the back of Team 7, who had been walking ahead, though staying at least 3 feet away from each other. He wondered how long the negative emotions between them would last. Naru's ears perked up at that, and she turned around so that she was walking backwards but facing her sensei. If you're paying, she said brightly. Doubtful any of you could afford that place at the moment, he said boredly, turning a page of his book. He would only bail out and leave them to pay at a cheap place, or when they could afford it with combined money, but at the moment, They'd just got onto Genpei, so he could wait. Sure, Sakura said happily, and immediately turned on the only male genin of the group. What about you, Sasuke-kun? No one missed the hopeful tone in her voice. Everyone took that as a yes from the nearly always silent Uchiha, who only spoke when he ordered them around, or to call Naru a name. Either way, at least he was talking more than he did in the academy. Team 7 made their way to the barbecue restaurant and found a table in the corner of the room, far enough away from anyone who would interrupt, but close enough to not be ignored by the waitresses. I've only ever been for a barbecue once, Naru said excitedly, and that caused her to pause momentarily. She couldn't remember coming here before, but she could have sworn it was very familiar. Once, Sakura asked in disbelief. She knew that Naru was an orphan, and didn't have a rich upbringing, but still. Really, was it Iruka-sensei who took you? Quote. Naru shook her head. I can't remember who, she said with a shrug. She had quite a good memory, but there was a big bit of her life that she couldn't remember, the space in between when she was 6, up until she was 8. Those 2 years were curiously blank. Kakashi looked at his smallest student strangely. Just then, the waitress walked over, a bright smile on her face, and a notepad in hand, the pencil poised ready to write. Hello, what would you like to order? She asked, her eyes roaming the table, but once they landed on Naru, they frosted over slightly, giving Naru the feeling that all the people from 5 years older and above than her knew her secret. Ribs, please, Sakura said politely. Spicy pork, Sasuke said coolly. Kakashi did not look up. The same as the brooder, he said, earning a dirty look from the Uchiha, and you, Naru. Quote. Chicken. Quote. The waitress jotted it all down, bestowed them with a smile that was less brighter than the previous one, and left. The table fell into silence, with only Naru's drumming fingers, and the noise of pages being turned, being the sounds that filled it. Forehead, a familiar voice said loudly, and Team 7 looked up to see Ino Yamanaka walking over to the table, her team in tow, the 3 of them looking noticeably worn. Naru could guess that it was because of Ino and her loud mouth. Sakura immediately jumped up. Ino pig, she said, hands falling to her sides to clench into fists. Sapphire eyes rolled as a whiskered cheek rested on a propped-up hand. Why in the world did Naru think that their rivalry would be left at the academy? They still lived in the same village, so of course they would run into each other. Shikamaru, Choji, she greeted her 2 former friends with a small wave. Shikamaru blinked sleepily at her, and Choji managed a small wave back before his hand dived into his always-present bag of crisps. Their sensei, Asuma, wandered over to the side of the table that Kakashi sat on and smirked at him. Treating your team, Kakashi, he said in a deep voice, with a slight rasp that only came from years of smoking. Hi, Kakashi said vaguely, my team have gone 3 weeks without killing each other. Quote. Team 7 shared a look. To be honest, that was a big deal for them. Ino snorted. Well, you're stuck with Naru, she said, using that reason as an insult, one that Sakura rose to quickly. Yeah, well your team isn't any better, she responded, at least I have Sasuke-kun. This sparked their long-time feud over Sasuke, while the rest of Team 8 sat down at the table with the others. Invite yourself along, Naru thought dryly, moving over to make room for Shikamaru and Choji, who chose to sit on either side of her. She brought up her other hand so that her chin could rest in the both of them. She looked at Sasuke, who was brooding, at Sakura and Ino, whose voices were slowly rising, and to her sensei, who seemed to be in a conversation that was purely one-sided to Asuma. So, how have your missions been going? Shikamaru asked around a yawn, as if the simple task of talking was once again too much for him. He looked ready to drop his head on the table and sleep for a good 5 hours. Naru shrugged. Good, she said, they're boring, and like chores, but they're missions. They couldn't be called missions, because they were normal household chores, or something a villager should be doing, but it got her money that she needed. Yeah, Choji said, nodding in agreement. I heard you delivered food to my clan house the other day. Quote. She made a face at that. Chores, I tell you, chores, she muttered, and looked around for the waitress who should be bringing their food any time soon, but judging by that look she'd received, the waitress was probably spitting in her food. A few minutes later, When Sakura and Ino's voices had reached dangerous levels, the waitress returned with a tray carrying their food. Seeing this, Sakura stopped arguing and sent her once-friend a glare. "We'll carry this on later," she warned, and sat back next to Sasuke, who must have been frozen on the inside as Ino dropped down on the other side of him. "Here you go," the waitress chirped, setting the plates down on the table, before she whipped out her notepad and stared expectantly at the others surrounding the table. After she took their orders, with quite a lot coming from Choji, which she expected, because she knew of the amikichis, she'd even served them a few times before. She bowed and walked away. Naru happily dug into her barbecue chicken, well aware of Choji staring hungrily at her food. Once the food of Team 8 had arrived, the only people who were actually talking were the two senseis, and even then, Kakashi only managed a few words in the space of 20 minutes, still managing to eat his food without taking off his mask, and Asuma was chatting away, apparently very used to the lack of conversation. Not too long ago, Sasuke had gotten up to go to the toilet, and when he'd returned, he had sat on the empty side of the table, making it clear that he wanted to be on his own while he ate. Not soon enough did Kakashi decide that it was time for Team 7 to leave, and after bidding Team 8 a goodbye, they departed. "Stupid Ino pig," Sakura scowled at the floor as if it had been the one attempting to sit next to Sasuke. "Just when I thought I had finally won." Quote, "What do you all want to do now?" Kakashi asked, sounding as though he was just asking out of politeness. "Well, I for one, am returning home to get cleaned up. I still have dirt on my dress," Sakura said, gesturing down at the small bit of dirt that was flecked on her pink dress. "I have dried blood on me," Naru said, giving that as her only answer, and with a small wave, she veered off course and down a small alley that would lead her to her street. Kakashi's voice came from behind her. "See you tomorrow, 8 o'clock, remember." Quote. Naru waved a hand over her shoulder. Once she arrived back at the run-down apartment complex she'd lived in for as long as she could remember, she took the 4 flights of stairs up to the top floor, walked down corridor, and unlocked the faded red door. She walked inside, closed the door and locked it behind her, before she ventured further into the small apartment. She looked at the tree in the corner of the room. "Maybe I should grow another one," she murmured, and walked over to her bed. Kneeling down, she pushed the bed a few feet away, revealing a rug underneath. She pulled up the rug and put her hand down a seemingly strong floorboard, but it loosened easily and the other end came up. It was a place where she hid her most precious things, just in case her apartment was broken into while she was out. Reaching in, she grabbed the old Mokuton scroll, feeling her fingers brush over something smooth, and she withdrew the priceless scroll and set it on the bed. Feeling curious as to what else was under the floorboard, she reached a bit further in and felt smooth edges of something, like a box. She grabbed it and brought it out, remembering to move the floorboard back to its previous place, and she set the box down on the bed. It was completely smooth and made of oak. A swirl, her swirl, was a small symbol on the front of the box, while the top of it had the leaf symbol on it. Tracing it with a fingertip, she felt a frown pull her lips downwards. She didn't remember this box, didn't remember buying it, or putting it in her hiding place. Still, it felt very, very familiar. Placing her finger against the swirl, she was startled when something cut her, and she immediately pulled her hand back. "Ow," she muttered, seeing the blood coming from her finger. It healed almost instantly, so she paid it no bother as her attention was drawn to the box as it made a little clicking noise, like a lock had been unlocked. She opened the lid of the box, and her eyes widened. Lying inside, face up, was the porcelain white mask of an Anbu, a weasel face painted onto it. Underneath it seemed to be another one, and when she picked up the weasel mask, she saw a black porcelain mask of the Anbu, one that she had never seen before, and there were 5 silver tears painted down the left cheek of the mask. Something inside her head panged, and she remembered a time. "Keep these safe for me, Naru-chan, me and your niece-san won't be back in a long, long time," a gentle, soothing voice that must have belonged to someone who was only in their early teens, and Naru remembered feeling safe because of that voice. "Why not?" Naru had asked in her small, young voice. There was a soft, sad smile. "Because something happened, and niece-san had to go away, sweetie." Quote. "What about you?" A single tear had fallen. I can't bear to be here without him, Naru-chan, the girl had explained, and they'll come to me because I knew him so well. I need to leave to keep it a secret, and keep our relationship safe. Quote. Naru had nodded. Will you come back, Ne-chan, once you've found Ni-san? Quote. The girl nodded. Hi, we'll come back and be a family again, she had whispered, kneeling down to face the younger Naru. She saw a cascade of dark hair falling over a shoulder, pretty blue eyes that held pain, and a lovely face that held grief. Forgive me, little sister, but this is for the best. Her eyes seemed to become hypnotizing. All went blank after that. Naru broke away from her memories, shaking her head in a bewildered manner. Who had that girl been? And what was that memory? She had no recollection of ever knowing a girl like that, nor did she have a brother and a sister, but being a family didn't necessarily by blood. So, who were her brother and sister? Deciding she wanted to know more, she dug deeper into the box, finding scrolls and paper that were hidden beneath the two masks. Notes, sweet notes saying they would be back soon, signed by SN and IU. Scrolls with jutsus on, jutsus that had the potential to be lethal. Then there was a necklace, a black string with small beads on, black and purple beads about 2 inches apart. Pretty, she muttered, and on instinct, she reached up and slipped it on over her head. It settled around her neck comfortably, and it felt like it belonged there. She continued her search, and found a letter addressed to her, in neat, slanted writing. Heart pounding with a deep feeling of familiarity, she opened it with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, and she began to read. Dear Naru, hey sweetie, I've gone out on a mission with the others, while your Ni-san finally takes a well-deserved rest. He should be along to see you later, but don't wait up too late, okay? Love you with all my heart. Your big sister, S. So she did have a sister, but it couldn't have been her real sister, because in that brief flash of memory, the one that must have been from those 2 years she can't remember, the girl had dark hair, but then again, siblings could have any colored hair depending on their parents. Though, she didn't get the feeling that the girl was her sister, especially with the initials SN, but IU might be her brother, because of the U, but she also got the feeling that he wasn't. She groaned, falling back onto the floor in frustration. Why couldn't she figure this out? It was all in her head, she knew it was, she could feel it. But it was like trying to remember a word you'd forgotten, or a name, and it was swimming around in there somewhere, but it was not coming to the surface. After taking a few minutes to get over it, she covered the floorboard again and put the bed back to where it belonged, and then she sat on it. Putting the box to one side, she opened up the Mokuton scroll and began reading. Half an hour later, she sat on her bed, legs crossed and her body relaxed. In her cupped hands was a small seed. Allowing her eyelids to slide shut, she took a deep breath and focused her chakra into the seed. It wasn't that hard to send her chakra somewhere in her body, it was just the fact of keeping it there, and in a small amount. The tree she had now started out as a seed, and gradually, her chakra had made it grow. Finally, she felt a strong chakra emerge, but it wasn't strong in like the solid feeling of wood that she'd had on the first night of using Mokuton. No, it was warm, until it began to get hotter, and hotter, until she could feel such a strong burning, and before she knew it, it was too late to stop it. The burning sensation flowed through her veins like liquid fire, lighting her nerves on fire. The most intense heat was in the pit of her stomach, and in her hands. A woozy feeling came over her, and she decided that she needed to take a break. Opening her eyes, she dropped them down to her hands, and her mouth opened for a scream that refused to come. The reason for her surprise and horror, her hands were no longer cupping a small seed, but instead, a small ball of fire that was flickering red, yellow and orange. It was burning, brightly and scoldingly, but her hands were not being affected. She quickly dropped her hands, and the ball of fire dropped into the water. Looking up, she found that she was no longer in her apartment, but instead she was standing in what appeared to be a sewer. Old, rusty pipes lined the cold stone walls, running down the length and going off in different directions, down the different turns and corridors provided, and she was knee-deep in murky water. None of this seemed recognizable to her, but she felt something familiar coming from one of the corridors. Looking down, she saw that there was a crimson trail, not blood but energy, floating through the water, and it turned down the right corridor. Something urged her to follow it, so she did. As she turned one corner, then another, and another, the red trail grew and grew until it had the width of a tree trunk, and just as she thought, almost hoped, she would reach the end of it, something stopped her in her tracks. It wasn't a horrible something, more of a something that was powerful, and it didn't want her near the source of that red chakra. A light grew, and grew, enveloping her senses, until she looked as if she were in pure golden white space, and just before she felt herself waking up, she heard a loud, terrifying roar. Naru's eyes flew open, an unnoticed glow of gold mixed with red fading, and she took a deep breath. Her hands felt hot, and a look settled her fears that her hands were on fire, but they were bright red, as if they had been subjected to heat. She took a deep breath. She wanted to forget about that, and pretend it wasn't real, because surely it couldn't be, and a month ago, she would have done just that, but not know that she knew the truth about herself. The truth about what she contained, and held. The truth that could have caused her to wake up in a sewer. After all, the Kyuubi no Kitsune was sealed inside of her. It had to be somewhere, and she thought that she might have just found where. The next morning, after a rather restless sleep and a quick breakfast of instant ramen, Naru had hazardously thrown her things in a bag, packing quite a bit since she wasn't sure how long she was going to be gone for, and she left her apartment. All her things were hidden under the loose floorboard, and she knew that Iruka-sensei would check on her apartment while she was gone, and water her first tree, but she couldn't ever be too careful. She met her teammates at the gate. Sakura looked tired, no surprise, and her pink hair was immaculately brushed, while her dress looked spotless, and she had a small brown shoulder bag. Sasuke didn't seem fazed by the early time, which made Naru wonder if he ever actually slept, and he had a black bag on his back. Chizuna wasn't here, which wasn't a surprise either, since she was sure he was lying in his bed, hungover. Kakashi-sensei wasn't there, and once again, no surprise. There was no talking, only the dirty looks Sakura shot Naru, as if it were her fault they were up this late, and in a way, it was, but Naru could have argued that Sakura didn't have to agree to take a higher-ranking mission, she could have refused. The ninjas on early shift at the gates were looking at the three genins, smirking at their tired looks, and they traded amused looks. What it was like to be a genin again, they didn't miss those days of waking up early. Another 20 minutes, and Chizuna came stumbling towards the gate, no sake bottle in sight, but it was obvious he was either still drunk from yesterday, or his hangover was causing him to stumble. Either answer would fit. His bloodshot eyes looked over them, and then around. Where's that Kakashi person? Quote. Path of life, Naru and Sakura said simultaneously, and then looked at each other. Glares were traded, and then they hastily looked away. Chizuna simply looked bemused. An hour later, Kakashi did show up, a bag on his back, and his book in hand. He looked wide awake and alert, well, as alert as he can, since he had a bored and sleepy look most of the time. Where've you been? Naru asked, raising an eyebrow, and expecting the same answer as she and Sakura had given Chizuna, but, rather surprisingly, he did not give that one. I was rescuing a cat from a tree, he said seriously, choosing to use another excuse, as he had started to do a week ago. He had many up his sleeve, but he didn't want to confuse or annoy his ducklings too soon. You're lying, Sakura screeched, pointing an accusing finger at him. Ma, he said, waving a hand ideally. Let's go, we don't want to waste daylight. He then walked off ahead, as he hadn't been the one who had held them all up. Team 7, after an annoyed silence, followed their sensei. Chizuna wondered what he had gotten himself into as he followed them. There wasn't much word spoken as they traveled away from Konoha and towards their destination. The end. Now we will see you in the next video.